This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. Very good morning to you. I wonder how much of what I'm about to tell you you know already. You might well know all of it. I've found some of it today. Some of it I already knew. I possibly hadn't knitted it all together in the way that I am going to try to do now. And it, once again, somewhat oddly, I was not expecting this to happen when I got up on Monday, but it knits together the two big stories of the week. The Southport murderer pleading guilty in court, and the inauguration of Donald Trump as the new president of the United States of America. And I still don't really understand quite how those planets have aligned, but align they have. Yesterday, it was because Keir Starmer delivered a speech absolutely stressing his understanding of and commitment to the rule of law, while Donald Trump is in the business of undermining and denying the rule of law. And in a sense, he has to. When he releases the January the 6th criminals, when he pardons them, he's not really pardoning them, as Emily Maitlis explains in an excellent article in The Eye today. He's pardoning himself. He's vindicating himself. They can't stay in jail if he wants to continue lying. So he has to release them. It's a sort of fascinating psychological circle, but it involves, of course, undermining the rule of law. And in fact, some of the legal and police professionals responsible for jailing the man who ran something called the Silk Road, a dark online marketplace where you could buy drugs and launder money and get up to all sorts of no good, he's pardoned him as well and described the people that pursued him legally as scum, calling the forces of law and order scum. Fascist playbook, let's just tick that box as well. And that's relevant to the conversation I want to have first today, because this chap, who you may not even have heard of, Ross Ulbricht, jailed for life, more than at least $200 million worth of drugs sold anonymously on the platform that he had set up, an online illegal drug marketplace. Sentenced to life, that's been commuted. Trump phoned his mother personally to tell him he was going to be released. So that's the attitude he takes to people who run and own illegal platforms where you and your children can buy drugs and launder money. I don't know what the score was with regards to getting hold of weapons, but it was on Amazon that the Southport killer bought his knife. Amazon, of course, is owned by Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos was sitting in the row behind Donald Trump at the latter's inauguration, sitting in front of the cabinet. That's not an accident. That's choreography. That's absolutely deliberate to point out that the billionaires, the people whose qualifications for the role are their bank balance and their sycophancy, the bank balance and their sycophancy was what gets them into that row. You could have a huge bank balance, but you're not going to be there if you're not sycophantic. You could be massively sycophantic, but you're not going to get there if you haven't got a huge bank balance. Guess which British politician who routinely claims to have the ear of Donald Trump and to have a special inside track and to possess the ability to act as a special envoy between London and Washington didn't even get into the room where it happens, much to his own humiliation. I'll leave that one hanging for a while. So it's corporatism. And on the subject of corporatism, when we were talking about Elon Musk's Nazi salutes yesterday and this hilarious attempt to pretend or to claim that it wasn't really a Nazi salute, it was a Roman salute, we mentioned Benito Mussolini. I'll mention him again today because he said fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate power. Anthony Scaramucci, who of course was very briefly in Trump's last administration, points out that there was symbolism to the family being in the front row at the inauguration, the billionaires in the second row, and cabinet in the third row. There's messages there, he said, to corporate America and the global society, take a bended knee to me. So, the man who owns the platform where the Southport killer bought his knife was sitting in that row behind Donald Trump's family. The man who owns the platform that still hosts and holds the footage that the Southport killer looked before he set off to that Taylor Swift dance class. He was not just sitting in the row directly behind Donald Trump. He is the guy that got on stage and did the Nazi salutes. Elon Musk has so far failed to remove a violent terrorist video from his platform, which was watched by Axel Rudakabana in the hour before he made his way to that Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport in July of last year. It was filmed in Sydney, and it shows the Assyrian bishop, Mari Emmanuel, being attacked as he speaks at the altar by a 16-year-old later charged with committing a terrorist act. He is, and this is pretty grisly if you want to turn me down briefly, he was stabbed in his face and his eye by the attacker, has lost his right eye as a consequence, and Rudakabana watched it less than an hour before he, armed with a knife bought from the platform owned by a billionaire sitting behind Donald Trump's family at the inauguration, watched it on a platform owned by a billionaire sitting behind Donald Trump's family at the inauguration, and then made his way to the dance class in Southport. And I mean, some of the stuff, you'll be aware of the Al-Qaeda manual and the writing that he was able to access online, but the full details of what he had in his home, in his bedroom, are staggering for two reasons. Number one, the sheer breadth of his enthusiasm for violence. The sheer breadth of his violence is extraordinary, incredibly democratic. Everything from the IRA right through to Fidel Castro. You've got just a reverence for genocide, a fascination with terrorism, violence, murder. And of course, that's why it has proved impossible to pin any ideology on him. But where do you think he found all that? Where does one go to find the sort of material that the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, yesterday described as deeply dangerous? The prosecution will provide at the sentencing on Thursday more detail about the material that he searched for online. But I can tell the House, Yvette Cooper said, the government is this week contacting technology companies to ask them to remove dangerous material that he accessed. So you'd use Google, right, in the first instance, and it would take you to YouTube. And guess who owns those platforms? Men who were sitting in the row behind Donald Trump's family and in front of the actual cabinet at the inauguration. So I am not given to hyperbole, but the aligning of these planets is at the very least notable, right? You might dismiss this out of hand. You might think Yvette Cooper is stupid to think that the men who own these platforms should take down the sort of material that could be responsible for either radicalizing or provoking. I think of the Brianna Jai case as well, where some of the stuff that those killers had been looking at would I mean, I don't know what figure of speech to use. I think I'm just going to say it would make a normal person puke. Right? It would actually make you get that watering in your mouth, your tummy goes fat, and you just want to look away. And yet it is relatively easy to find. I can also tell you that I kind of think I told you this at the time, but I wasn't 100% sure of my facts. The terrorist handbook owned by the attacker was listed on the websites of major booksellers. I can't remember whether I told you this or not. If I didn't, it was because I thought it can't be true, despite the fact that a colleague had told me that it was. So you've got online texts, including military studies in the jihad against tyrants, the Al-Qaeda training manual, which Waterstones had for sale as a hardback and a paperback on its website. So again, the claims of cover-up and misinformation because he had something that was for sale on the Waterstones website look ridiculous. But it's this... It's this, well, the state corporatism, this alliance of the men who own these platforms, where we're just using Rudakabana as one example, where he watched a terrorist attack a human being with a knife shortly before he marched into that dance class and attacked human beings with a knife, who own the platform where he bought the knife, who own the search engines that he would use to find the material that he collected, who own the platforms where you can watch the video. So Twitter has it on their website. That's Elon Musk's. But YouTube, I haven't double checked whether YouTube has it there or not, actually. So scratch that for the time being. But where you buy the knife, where you watch the videos, where you can search for stuff that is technically illegal, and the men respond. And there's two elements to this. So the first bit is this. The men responsible for owning all of the platforms are all now bending the knee for Donald Trump. The second bit is that they've all changed their tune. So Sergey Brin, who owns Google, was very much opposed to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's own vice president questioned whether or not he'd turn out to be the American Hitler not long ago, but that ship has sailed. Mark Zuckerberg banned him from Facebook, was absolutely adamant that there was no room on his platforms for this kind of rhetoric and violence and lies, the democracy-damaging demagoguery that we saw on January the 6th. Even Elon Musk was at one point a Joe Biden supporter. So they've all thrown their lot in with Donald Trump through fear and self-interest and a dedication to further self-enrichment. But what the hell can a British government do to rein them in? Because that is the fight that they've picked. Yvette Cooper yesterday accused the tech firms of profiting from hosting content that put children's lives at risk and urged them to act before new online laws took effect this year. I told you yesterday that the relationship between Elon Musk's sudden interest in British politics and the arrival of new online safety laws is almost certainly not a coincidence. But to see them all lined up together yesterday, all of the men who between them could by tea time today limit the sale of knives, limit access to radicalizing material, remove footage of crimes being committed that was watched in the hour before he went to the dance class in Southport by the murderer who pleaded guilty this week. All of these, they could do it. I think they could do it by tea time today. I remember before Elon Musk bought Twitter, things would disappear incredibly quickly. You know, even use of the C word, if you reported it, it would see the post, if not the account holder, taken down. It was an imperfect system, but it was at least a vaguely civilized one. And some of the people that were removed from the platform were removed for disseminating far-right lies. And Musk, of course, brought them all back. All of them. So I don't know who is qualified to answer the question that I am about to ask you. And again, I don't know how many of the things I've just shared with you you already knew. The pardoning, perhaps, of the Silk Road founder, the man whose website hosted illegal drug trades, pardoned by a man who is motivated by opposition to illegal drug trades when they are undertaken by foreign cartels. I don't understand the logic of that. It's got something to do with libertarianism. But the rest of it, the fact that the people who own these sites, these platforms, could do what the British government wants, even as Donald Trump seems to be preparing to do whatever it is that they want. Facebook has some hideous content on it, Mark Zuckerberg's platform, and that really now, in the absence of fact checkers, can only get worse. So 17 minutes after 10 is the time. Here's my question for you. How feasible is it? Technologically, how feasible is it to actually get the genie back in the bottle? Whether you want to talk about it being possible to buy knives on Amazon, which may have come as a surprise to some people with no apparent age checking or verification, something that the government is seeking to address, or indeed to, I know you can't get rid of all of it. I know if you take it down from there, it will pop up again there. But these platforms, these household name platforms that have made their way into pretty much every home in the country, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the YouTubes, get it off there. Make it harder to find the radicalizing material, the filming, the film of terrorist attacks actually being undertaken. And surely the overall situation would improve. That's what I think. I could be wrong. And as ever, give me a ring and tell me why. 0345 6060 973. Because it's a bit of a shocker, right? That those men are all lining up in the row behind Trump. And yet on this side of the Atlantic, we are increasingly concerned about the material, whether it is a physical item like a knife or an ethereal item like a film. We're increasingly concerned about the ease of access to the things that they make their money from. Can the tech companies be reined in? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I think, history has taught us, particularly when you look at gambling sites, they can do a heck of a lot more to limit access. But I can't believe that the film of a stabbing watched by this criminal in the hour before he undertook a murderous stabbing, I can't believe that is so easily accessible. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm stupid. But here it is. 90 minutes after 10 is the time. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. Can the British government, or indeed any government, particularly in the absence of American support, do anything to limit access to the sort of material, the images of horrific violence, if the tech firms don't want to do it? Is there anything the British government can do? Here's the real point, okay? Online harms. How can we protect our children from online harms, including violence, if the platforms don't want to be regulated? Is there anything we can do? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I just don't know. Yvette Cooper thinks it's possible. Keir Starmer thinks it's possible. Is it possible in a world where Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Sergey Brin and Larry Page are on the right side, where they want to help? They want to make it harder for your children to watch hideous violence online? Maybe. But if they don't, what chance has our government got of making things better for our children? Hit the numbers now, you will get through, okay? I don't know much about this world, but I do naively believe that it must be possible to do more. The thing I don't know is whether you can do more when the people who are capable of delivering what you desire are lining up behind a man whose respect for the rule of law is absolutely non-existent, and who has described the people who locked up the man who ran a platform that was literally an illegal drug marketplace. He's described the law and order professionals who locked him up as scum. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 23 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And you just sort of wonder sometimes whether or not you're living in the same, whether you're inhabiting the same planet. Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer want to reduce the ease with which our children can access online harms, including hideous violence. You know, you're 4 clicks away from watching a woman get raped online, and the idea that is unavoidable and inevitable, that there is nothing we can do about it, seems to me to be, well, the conversation seems to be overdue, but crucially, it seems to me to be pathetic to throw up our hands in surrender, to wave a white flag and to say, oh, there's nothing we can do about it. The problem is, I don't know what we can do about it, or whether indeed it would be effective, and I'm hoping that you might be able to answer the question of what Yvette Cooper can realistically demand from Elon Musk or Sergey Brin or Larry Page or Mark Zuckerberg, and what we can do, or what they can do. I think in the context of this conversation, I'll say what we can do if they refuse to take down the sort of footage that the Southport murderer was watching an hour before he went into that dance class in Southport. I'm not holding anyone except him responsible for what happened. But we discussed yesterday the impossibility of answering the question of what else could have been done to prevent it from happening by the authorities. I'm fairly confident there's a case to be made to argue that if he hadn't been watching someone undertake a hideous violent stabbing minutes before he undertook the hideous violent stabbing himself, then he might not have undertook the hideous violent stabbing. He certainly wouldn't have been in the mental space that you would inhabit simply as a consequence of watching that kind of thing. 25 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Let's have a word with Nick, who's in Swindon. Nick, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Massive fan, but I've got to pull you up on something you said. Because,
of course.
Facts are important and all that. I work for Amazon. So I delivered for Amazon for a year last year. The worst job I've ever had. Absolutely hated every second of it. But they are super, super strict on knives.
Yeah, a couple of people have told me that, and I presumed so as well. You need a passport or a verified credit card to get to order a knife online, and presumably, even when you get an Ocado Zoom, if it's got alcohol in it, you've got to prove you're over 18 to receive it. But this 17-year-old somehow got hold of a knife via Amazon, so the suggestion, if not the conclusion, is that the system is fallible. The system is flawed.
Yes, it must have been a rogue courier because everything's in place. So if you appear to be under 25, I think that's 25. You have to show ID on the doorstep.
But he got one. He was easily. I mean, this is what she said in the comments yesterday, that he'd been convicted for violence. He was 17 years old, and he was able to order a knife on Amazon. How do you think that happened then? I don't
know because I was in situations where I was asking 80-year-old ladies for their year of birth. No, wait for it. Plastic cutlery sets.
And okay. Well, you're right. That's a helpful wrinkle. But the fact remains that he, as the House of Commons was told yesterday, a conviction for violence and just 17 and able to order a knife on Amazon. Frank's in Newcastle. Frank, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I would just like to say that I think we do need some regulation, something put in place. I think. But if we wait for the tech companies to actually do something, I think it'll be too late. I think as parents, we need to monitor what our children are doing online and what they're watching, what kind of content they're getting fed. But I just don't think there's enough information out there from the tech companies to put their parental controls in place that they've got on the apps already.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a bit of a small response to a massive problem, doesn't it? And yeah. Children, I mean, I guess it's changing now, but generationally, the kids would get across the technology often quicker than the adults. But I'll tell you something else. Just reading this line and not being shocked by it is a position I can't get my head around. The video, which shows a live-streamed knife attack by a terrorist on a bishop in Australia last year, can still be viewed on Elon Musk's site. It was watched by Radikabana just before he set off from his home to murder 3 young girls at their Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport on July the 29th. I don't know whether I've sort of taken leave of my senses, but I would have expected that to make everybody sit up and take notice. No one's suggesting that Elon Musk is responsible for the Southport terror attacks, but a 17-year-old boy, whether he's got violent tendencies or not, shouldn't be able to watch that. I mean, definitely a 7-year-old boy could watch it just as easily.
Correct.
I don't know. I mean, maybe we have just allowed the genie to get so far out of the bottle that the idea of getting it back in again feels impossible. But do we have, beyond things like parental controls, do we have the knowledge, do we have the understanding of the issue to answer the question of whether or not this is actually doable? 0345 6060 973. I don't know if Idiot's Corner is quite the right way to describe some of the responses that I'm getting this morning. To be absolutely clear, you are either in favour of children being able to easily access footage of murders and rapes online, or you're against it. And listen, you want to take children out of the equation. It's not censorship to stop people from watching illegal acts online. The idea that this constitutes some sort of political position is ridiculous. I know people are furious that he didn't turn out to have come over here on a small boat from Calais, that he didn't turn out to be an Islamist, that he didn't turn out to be all of the things that all of the liars managed to provoke massive riots on our streets last summer by claiming that he was. That's a conversation for a different day. This is about the tech platforms possessing the ability to limit all of our access. He's just a rallying point. He's just an emblem of what you can find online, everything from terrorist manuals right through to footage of terrorist attacks. And I don't believe it's that difficult to make it much harder to access. It's quite unpatriotic not to want our government to try, isn't it? 10:30 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34 is the time. It's one of those days where every rock you look under, you find 10 more rocks. So Juliet, in Glasgow, sent me this message a few moments ago. If only the tech bosses had to do the site cleanups themselves, taking down dreadful material destroys the minds of the employees who have to watch it in order to earn a living. Now that rang a little bell in my brain. And I found the bell. It's a story that you may have missed. It broke a week before Christmas last year. So, just about a month ago. It's a story about 140 Facebook content moderators in Kenya, presumably because it would be cheaper to pay Kenyans to do this kind of work than Californians. 140 Facebook content moderators diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder caused by exposure to graphic social media content, including murders, suicides, child sexual abuse, and terrorism. Now, I know that Facebook is getting rid of fact checkers because it saves money and also because facts are the enemy of Donald Trump. I don't know whether they are getting rid of moderators, but I do know that it is not something that the new administration in America is going to be worrying about unduly, given that the president has just pardoned a man who ran an online illegal drug trade. I can understand why, if you're drinking the Trump Kool-Aid, this is a horrible listen for you. But it's all just there in front of us, or rather behind the family of the president, the men who own these platforms. So how many times have we sat here and said, it's not even about their motivation. It's about making more money. Regulation limits profit. Moderation limits profit. So the people whose job it is to find it and remove it are suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, from major depressive disorder, from general anxiety disorder. And God only knows what it does to the brains of people who seek it out. A couple of you suggesting that anybody who thinks that this is defensible or thinks that this stuff should remain online or thinks that these men shouldn't be held more accountable for what is accessible via the platforms from which they derive their enormous fortunes, anybody who's got a problem with what I'm saying should be looked into themselves. Why would you want footage of child sexual abuse, of murders, of suicides, of terrorism to be easily accessible to children? Why on earth would anybody want that? But that's not the question I'm asking. I'm too frightened to ask that question. The question I'm asking is, how feasible would it be to get rid of all of it, most of it, some of it? I'd love to speak to someone who's done that job. I know it's a big ask. You're unlikely to be listening to me in Kenya, but you never know. Not that specific job, but someone who has worked in the sphere of trying to hold back the tide. I'd love to know where you think your industry is, whether things are better or worse, whether it really is as simple as saying to the richest men in the world, we're going to slightly dial down your profit forecast for next year in order to make it harder for children to watch rapes. Yeah, you'll still be the richest men in the world, lads. Chill out. But we're just going to dial down your profit forecast for next year because we're going to make you spend more money on making sure that it's not easy for people like the Southport killer to watch footage of a knife terror attack in a church in Australia. Hey, look, call me Mary Whitehouse. Do you see what I mean? But I guess the problem with Trump, if you spent yesterday defending Nazi salutes, you're going to spend today defending tech billionaires who do nothing to stop our children and our colleagues and ourselves from accessing this kind of, I don't even want to say filth. Jack's in Brighton. Jack, what would you like to say?
Well, hi, morning, James. I haven't got the solution for Amazon, but for the rest, I think the solution is that we reclassify them as publishers, not platforms. Yeah. We need to stop talking about them as platforms and start talking about them as publishers, because then they would be liable under all of the same regulations that broadcasters, that newspapers.
Imagine if they put this on the LBC website. Some of this stuff.
Exactly. yeah, I mean, it would be regulated by Ofcom, right? But the risk in doing that is that they will do what they've done when they've been faced down in any other market, Canada and Australia being the primary examples, by the news organisations. They just threaten to pull out altogether, which, you know, you be the judge of whether that's a good or a bad thing.
Well, I mean, we think to TikTok, don't we, in the last week, and the ability just to switch it off. We know that they turned off Twitter in I forget which South American country it was. So it is doable, but it's a zero-sum game. It's all or nothing in that context. In the other context, it's clearly a world you know a bit more, well, a lot more than I do about. Is it as simple as it looks from the outside? Is it simply that relationship between regulation and profit? So, you know, I am the richest man in the world, but I don't want to spend a chunk of change on getting this kind of filth removed from my site, because if I don't spend it on that chunk of change makes its way back towards me and my shareholders.
Well, I think it's more that it's the kind of same thin end of the wedge argument that we've had in reverse. And what I mean by that is they are worried that if they accept any regulation, it will stop that kind of viral loop, which ultimately drives advertising. And advertising is ultimately, with the exception of Amazon.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, you're right. There's two sides to the coin. So there's the cost of regulation, which would be negligible compared to the drop-off in usage if some of this stuff isn't being accessed by people with adverts attached to it. Good God, we should explore that further, but I have some breaking news for you. The lawyer representing Prince Harry and the former Labour Deputy Leader, Lord Watson, has, in their trial against the publishers of the Sun newspaper, News Group Newspapers Limited, has just made an announcement. LBC's Fraser Knight has been following proceedings at the High Court. Fraser, what's happened? Oh, I beg your pardon. We'll be crossing shortly to LBC's Fraser Knight at the High Court. I can tell you what the announcement is. They have reached an agreement. That's what Fraser is reporting back to base as he tries to find a path out of the court. So the lawyer representing Prince Harry and the former Labour Deputy Leader, Lord Watson. And you'll remember that yesterday we ran through just some of the allegations that have been made against Rupert Murdoch's parent company, say they have reached an agreement. I think unexpected, although we've examined the possible outcomes and the possible pathways on that might lead to this sort of settlement. We'll find out what we know. We'll find out more about what we know shortly when Fraser Knight joins me from the High Court. Let's go back to John. No, let's go to, Jack in Brighton. Thank you. Staying on the coast. Let's go to John, who's in Southampton. John, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. Thank you for having me on. I don't pretend to be an expert on cyber law or anything like that, but...
Well, I don't think you need to be, do you? I don't think Yvette Cooper is. I mean, all she's saying is we have to change the law, whatever it is.
No, I agree. I think we need to take... I think all of this, it has to stop. It has to stop. It's not about... you take the word cyber out of the equation. Just leave it at the word law. If you make something law... And if the government turn around and if they turn to the companies that host these sites, and they say, right, okay, the law in the UK is this, or the law in the UK we have a mandate from the population. We're in government for 5 years. Yes. We have passed a law that says certain material cannot appear on your site. If you either remove it by this date and make measures so that it doesn't reappear, or you will be in breach of the law. And if that means you want to take us to court, take us to court.
I don't know. Do you know one of the very first phone-ins I conducted on this programme that made me think, we could maybe do things a little bit differently from how this medium has worked in the past, was a question about whose jurisdiction does it come under? We're going back nearly 20 years, John. So if I'm writing stuff in America that is being uploaded through a server in Greenland and then being viewed in England, whose laws apply?
I think it has to be at the point of access, because we have no jurisdiction over the point of origin.
It's the ownership of the publisher or platform, and I think the distinction between the two was highlighted very articulately by a previous caller. If you own this platform, and Yvette Cooper puts it quite well, if you are profiting from hosting content that puts children's lives at risk, and that's the story this week. There are several other harms you could insert into that space. If you're profiting from hosting content that ... celebrates violence, puts children's lives at risk, there's a million things you can think of, then we're telling you to stop. And that's where it gets grey, as you say. That's where the absence of legal knowledge becomes problematic, because we are asking technology companies this week to remove dangerous material, specifically the material that Reda Cabana accessed. What if they just say no?
Well, they can say no, but if they say no and the law states that certain material can't appear online, then the government would have every right to actually take them to court for it. Now, they might laugh and say, well, we can employ the best lawyers in the world, you'll be in court forever. But it doesn't mean the government shouldn't at least try to take on these tech companies, because Facebook banned Donald Trump.
Yes.
Mark Zuckerberg attended his inauguration.
It's an
this
extraordinary
week,
moment, isn't it?
They
banned him for lying, for lying knowingly through his teeth about about winning an election that he lost.
But that seemed to. It seemed to. This is almost an illustration of the point. The fact that the tech companies seem to side with, when it became obvious that Trump was not only mounting a challenge but was on a good course to win. Suddenly, a few months later, Facebook, the founder of Facebook, is at his inauguration.
Yes,
I mean that is possibly the biggest U-turn I've ever seen, and
well,
I think
it's all about the Benjamins, isn't it, John?
Well, I just can't help thinking, James, that governments lack, not only in this country but in all countries, they seem to think that these tech companies can act with utter impunity because their political future lives and dies based on what appears online.
Yvette Cooper seems to be challenging that presumption, though, of course, Cami Badenoch not long ago was singing the praises of Elon Musk. Whether or not PMQs today explores any of this territory, only time will tell. But yeah, I mean, the money raised from advertising, profiting from hosting content, is a much bigger issue, obviously. It was the previous caller in Brighton, Jack, wasn't it, who pointed that out. It's not about the cost of regulation. It's about the cost of not having money made from the stuff that is currently being accessed. I genuinely find this a curious mixture of obvious and baffling. It's obvious to me, it's obvious to John, it's obvious to many of us that this shouldn't be permitted, this shouldn't be allowed. It's baffling as to why it is. But it's also a question of how feasible and plausible it is. I'll read this from Stephen, because I think, with respect to Stephen, I think this is the sound of someone struggling to accept what it is that they've been cheering for all week. He tells me, Musk, Bezos and Zuckerberg met Biden on many occasions, and not once did the previous administration raise the subject of content removal. I mean, are you trying to sort of? Are we doing a both sides here? Are we, Stephen? You're trying to say that Biden was in the pocket of these people, or that they were in the pocket of Biden in the way that we've seen with Trump? Because if you are, mate, then I've got a bridge that I might be able to interest you in the purchase of.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2:11 is the time. I warned you that this was one of those mornings where I sort of sense or see connections between stories that are not immediately linked. And I mean, the same thing has happened, because we're talking about the new media barons, aren't we? We're talking about the new owners of access, controllers of access to material. Prince Harry, of course, in the High Court, or at least bringing a case in the High Court against News Group newspapers, really very much about the old generation of media control, the old generation of owners. And I can tell you that they have reached a settlement. Copies of it will be circulated at the time of its reading. We're expecting a statement to be read outside court by counsel for the claimants at around about now. And after that, Lord Watson, Tom Watson as was, will also be reading a statement. So I am going to begin to read to you the full apology that News Group newspapers have issued to Prince Harry and Lord Watson. And I may have to interrupt myself to go live to the steps of the High Court for the reading of that statement from the counsel for the claimant. So here it comes. And hold on to your hats, all right? Because this goes further than I think many people would expect. NGN, which is News Group Newspapers, offers a full and unequivocal apology to the Duke of Sussex for the serious intrusion by the Sun between 1996 and 2011 into his private life, including incidents of unlawful activities carried out by private investigators working for the Sun. NGN also offers a full and unequivocal apology to the Duke of Sussex for the phone hacking, surveillance and misuse of private information by journalists and private investigators instructed by them at the News of the World. NGN further apologises to the Duke for the impact on him of the extensive coverage and serious intrusion into his private life, as well as the private life of Diana, Princess of Wales, his late mother, in particular during his younger years. We acknowledge and apologise for the distress caused to the Duke and the damage inflicted on relationships, friendships and family, and have agreed to pay him substantial damages. It is also acknowledged, without any admission of illegality, that NGN's response to the 2006 arrests and subsequent actions were regrettable. NGN also offers a full and unequivocal apology to Lord Watson for the unwarranted intrusion carried out into his private life during his time in government by the News of the World during the period 2009 to 2011. This includes him being placed under surveillance in 2009 by journalists at the News of the World and those instructed by them. NGN also acknowledges and apologises for the adverse impact this had on Lord Watson's family and has agreed to pay him substantial damages. In addition, in 2011, News International received information. That information was being passed covertly to Lord Watson from within News International. We now understand that this information was false and Lord Watson was not in receipt of any such confidential information. News Group Newspapers apologises fully and unequivocally for this. So NGN offering full and unequivocal apologies to both plaintiffs in this case and admitting incidents of unlawful activities up to and including surveillance and phone hacking. It is, to my untutored eye, and to use a fashionable word, an unequivocal victory for Prince Harry and an absolute expose of the disgusting practices that were commonplace at every level of Rupert Murdoch's empire for an unconscionable period of time. Fraser Knight is at the High Court, where presumably eyebrows are yet to settle in response to this apology and the imminent statement. Fraser.
Well, James, we heard that talks and negotiations went on into the night after the delays to this trial starting yesterday. And I think now it's clear that the length of time in those negotiations was likely to be how News Group newspaper would word this statement, this apology, taking, acknowledging and apologising for the use of those illegal tactics. Of course, they have paid a number of other people, 1,300 over the years, to avoid court hearings like the one that was due to begin here yesterday, due to go on for 8 to 10 weeks, with Prince Harry himself expected to come and give evidence. He had always said this wasn't about money, this was about accountability. But now, clearly, the sum that's been offered by News Group newspapers is so big that even he saw this as being the case that it wasn't worth going through this, because the way the British system is set up, it would have meant that even if he'd won this trial and been awarded damages, it would have been lower than the amount that was being offered by the publishers of The Sun. And so he would have been liable to pay for both sides' legal fees. But it's the wording of that statement from News Group newspapers that really matters here. Prince Harry will be looking at that as a big win for him.
Well, crucially, and not to correct you, but just to remind people listening that the previous settlements have all involved a denial of any illegality or wrongdoing. And yet this is, this is a 50-foot high guilty plea, effectively, from NGN.
this is a big admission. And I think that really, for Prince Harry, was always what he wanted. He wanted them to admit what he had been claiming of these illegal tactics of phone hacking, of surveillance, of blagging, of intrusion into private lives. That will be what he was always looking for. Those negotiations that were going on through the day yesterday, of course, the delays to the trial, they said, was because of the time differences. Prince Harry still understood to be in LA, and they were waiting for him to get involved really in those negotiations to make sure that wording was there. I think kind of just reading and hearing from David Sherborne, the lawyer that was representing both Prince Harry and Lord Tom Watson, the wording from News Group newspapers really matters in there, where they are apologising, they are acknowledging that they did use unlawful activities, and for people who worked for The Sun, that's something they always denied had happened. So this is a huge moment. The trial won't go ahead, so the years of evidence that the Duke of Sussex and his legal team have been gathering won't be, gone through bit by bit in court as was expected, and no doubt a huge sum of money of damages, substantial damages being paid to both Prince Harry and to Lord Watson, the former Deputy Labour leader.
Yeah, thank you, Fraser. I don't know, and I don't think you will know, whether or not the judge plays a role in this sort of decision. If the accused are prepared to make a full and unequivocal apology and to admit to unlawful activities, then I don't know whether legal rubric dictates that the judge takes a view on whether the case can proceed or not. It may not be entirely about the eye-watering sums of money that are clearly being bandied about, but the sheer cost and inconvenience of a massive case like this. A judge might say, well, look, you've received a full and unequivocal apology, and they've admitted to illegal activity. There is not much point in pursuing this case further.
Well, because they've reached an out-of-court settlement, it immediately means that trial has been thrown out. The David Sherborne got up and said, we request for this to be an end. That was their justification for the delays yesterday as well, was if you allow us to talk, we reckon we can get to a point which would be beneficial to the court, because you don't need to spend 10 weeks. And already the judge has said
and millions of pounds.
This has used up a huge...
Yes, exactly that. I mean, we'll need some legal experts to enlighten us further on that kind of thing. But in terms of what do we think has changed in the course of the last 24 or 48 hours, where most observers were expecting the case to proceed, because if a settlement were going to be reached, then it would have been reached before today. I would cautiously posit the idea that what has changed is News Group newspapers signalling to the Duke of Sussex's lawyers that they were prepared to go this far. I suspect that is more significant than the number of noughts on whatever compensation has been agreed. It was their preparedness to actually deploy words like full and unequivocal apology, to deploy words like incidents of unlawful activities, to deploy words in Tom Watson's case like being placed under surveillance in 2009. That I suspect we'll discover in the coming hours is what's changed in the last 24.
I would imagine so too, and there will have been a real balancing act behind the scenes as well, where they've probably looked at this and thought, we'd rather say, these words, these sentences in this statement than go through 10 weeks of coming under intense scrutiny in front of the world to see as we report on what would have been said during that trial. So there will have been those lawyers and indeed the owners of News Group newspaper looking at this saying, we'd rather just own up to this in a controlled way through this agreement where, we won't get the full details of everything that's gone on there, but they have admitted liability to some extent, and that for Prince Harry clearly is what he was after. It is enough, he's clearly said, for him to not proceed with this trial. It's accountability, his life's work, as he said, to hold the press to account where they have intruded on his private life and that of his late mother, Princess Diana, which again News Group newspapers have owned up to and apologised for in this case as well.
And we will presumably be expecting a statement from Prince Harry at some point soon as well. But it will be the statement from the council that we hear first. I'm expecting it any minute now. So we'll go to the news, I think, but with the caveat that we may interrupt the news. Everything is interruptible if the court, if the counsel for the claimants appears on the steps of the court with the statement that we are expecting. It's 11:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
5 minutes after 11 is the time. Absolutely. I mean, listen, no one would have enjoyed to see a court case more than me, where some of the accusations would have been explored in further detail. And of course, all of the people who have been persuaded to hate Prince Harry because he married a woman of colour are going to pretend that this is not an unequivocal victory for the Duke of Sussex. But it's an extraordinary moment. Remember, £1 billion or thereabouts already paid out in compensation to people with no admission of criminality. But the understanding of the legal system, or rather the role of the legal system, is pretty clear in a case like this. The case has been settled because everything that can possibly be settled is settled, writes a legal correspondent. In other words, the crucial shift here is not the number of zeros on the compensation payment. It is the fact that newsgroup newspapers have admitted illegality. They've admitted illegal activity, at which point I imagine that the judge says there is no justification for the continuing of this case. Let me see if I can find lots of love coming in for Prince Harry. Let me see if I can find anyone in Idiot's Corner today. Here's one. Oh, Steve, thank you, mate. Another one of your knights in shining armour is taking the easy road. So much for his true character and reasons behind the case, hardly laying the press bare, more scared of his own future image. So I love people like Steve, because I don't have to spend much time wondering what on earth half-wits are going to do to pretend that this isn't what it is. I'll give you any odds you want that Steve is also a big, big fan of Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and adamant that there was no Nazi salute yesterday. And the point, of course, is that truth is now negotiable. They have been lying forever about what went on at newsgroup newspapers, and now the truth is out there. Prince Harry has given up years of his life, and God knows what the mental toll has been, to prove that they were lying, to prove that he had been illegally targeted by Rupert Murdoch's empire. And he has now proved it. Proved it in a particularly satisfying way, because he's proved it by forcing them to admit it, to apologise, and to give him, presumably, millions of pounds. I'm such a weirdo, in a good way, not like Steve. I'm such a weirdo that I can't wait to see how the professional versions of Stephen Guilford try to spin this. I suspect he's given us an early indication. The idea that there was a choice involved, or that there is some sort of capitulation from the other side. So imagine you're in a battle, right? It's you against me. And I push you into a position where you put your hands in the air and say, I'm really, really sorry. I'm completely guilty. Here's millions of pounds. There are elements of the UK media, please, I hope not even in this room, but it's not impossible that there will be elements of the UK media tomorrow who will try to pretend that what I've just described to you, the other side saying, I did it, I'm sorry, here's millions of pounds, that is somehow not an unequivocal victory for me. So the person you're up against says, I did it, I'm sorry, here's millions of pounds. And because your hatred of Meghan Markle, or your forelock-tugging approach to the establishment, or, God forbid, your almost erotic fascination with Rupert Murdoch is so complete that you can't even see the wood for these particular trees. Look, if you're on Rupert Murdoch's payroll, or if you've hitched yourself to his wagon for your entire career, I get it. I understand. It's too late now. It's like Brexit. You can't turn around and say, oh dear, this is all very embarrassing. I wish I'd never got involved in that kind of thing. But why an ordinary punter like Stephen Guilford would be sucking it up on behalf of the last generation's Elon Musk, if you like. That's one way of looking at Rupert Murdoch, is anybody's guess. So the reason why I'm slightly waffling is that I've been told that the statement is likely to be read outside court at approximately 11:10, and it is now 9 minutes after 11. I might read you the apology again, actually, in case you're just joining us, and in case you... and to be fair, I'm not finding many other applicants for Idiot's Corner, but in case you don't understand the impact of what has happened today, then let me read you the apology again. Remember, they've never admitted any wrongdoing, ever, in this context. And when one journalist was sent to jail back in the day, the defence was always one rogue reporter. This is what has happened this morning. News Group Newspapers offers a full and unequivocal apology to the Duke of Sussex for the serious intrusion by the Sun. Do I need to explain what unequivocal means? Would that help, do you think? Or would I be barking in the wind? Would I be wasting my time? I'm not sure. Between 1996 and 2011, 5 years of intrusion, serious intrusion into his private life, including, wait for it, incidents of unlawful activities carried out by private investigators working for the Sun. News Group Newspapers also offers a full and unequivocal apology to the Duke of Sussex for the phone hacking. Someone went to jail for phone hacking. 2 people, I think, went to jail for phone hacking, but not for the hacking of Prince Harry's phone, for which they are now offering a full and unequivocal apology. Surveillance and misuse of private information by journalists and private investigators instructed by journalists at the News of the World. News Group Newspapers further apologises to the Duke for the impact on him of the extensive coverage and serious intrusion into his private life, as well as the private life of Diana, Princess of Wales, his late mother, in particular during his younger years. From what I know, that would have been a sentence that the Prince was particularly keen to have included in any apology. Although it carries no legal impact, the emotional and mental impact on him as a younger man and on his late mother is something that he's carried with him for his entire life. We acknowledge and apologise for the distress caused to the Duke and the damage inflicted on relationships, friendships and family, and have agreed to pay him substantial damages. Again, 15 years, not 5 years. I'm sorry, I've told you before. So that's between 1996 and 2011. That's a period of 15 years. That's just under a third of his life. I shouldn't have done another fraction, should I, after getting those numbers wrong? I've probably got that bit wrong as well. That acknowledgement and apology for the damage inflicted on relationships, friendships and family. Remember, over a 15-year period. And have agreed to pay him substantial damages. Again, all of the damages paid in previous years to previous plaintiffs have not come with an admission of wrongdoing. This includes, it is also acknowledged without any admission of illegality that NGN's response to the 2006 arrests and subsequent actions were regrettable. That's another area into which we'll have to dig a little bit deeper. I'm 99% sure I know exactly what that refers to, but I don't think 99% certainty is enough when you're discussing things like this live on air. News Group Newspapers also offers a full and unequivocal apology to Lord Watson for the unwarranted intrusion carried out into his private life during his time in government by the News of the World during the period 2009 to 2011. Checked notes, yes, that is 2 to 3 years. This includes him being placed under surveillance in 2009 by journalists at the News of the World and those instructed by them. NGN also acknowledges and apologises for the adverse impact this had on Lord Watson's family and has agreed to pay him substantial damages. I know that Tom Watson's marriage broke down during some of the relevant period here. I don't have the knowledge to speak on what role these experiences played in that process, but I don't think you need to be clairvoyant to wonder whether they played a fairly significant role. In addition, in 2011, News International received information that information was being passed covertly to Lord Watson from within News International. We now understand that this information was false and Lord Watson was not in receipt of any such confidential information. NGN apologises fully and unequivocally for this. So there it is. A full and unequivocal apology to the Duke of Sussex for the serious intrusion by Rupert Murdoch's newspapers for a period of 15 years, affecting by their own account damage on his relationships, his friendships and his family, substantial damages in place and, crucially, admissions of unlawful activities, phone hacking, surveillance, misuse of private information by journalists and investigators, the News of the World. And here is the statement from Prince Harry's counsel, David Sherborne.
In a monumental victory today, News UK have admitted that The Sun, the flagship title for Rupert Murdoch's UK media empire, has indeed engaged in illegal practices. This represents a vindication for the hundreds of other claimants who were strong-armed into settling without being able to get to the truth of what was done to them. After endless resistance, denials, and legal battles by newsgroup newspapers, including spending more than £1 billion in payouts and in legal costs, as well as paying off those in the know, in order to prevent the full picture from coming out, News UK is finally held to account for its illegal actions and its blatant disregard for the law. It has also specifically admitted wrongdoing against Tom Watson and admitted unlawful acts by The Sun, as well as by the News of the World against Prince Harry. The truth that has now been exposed is that newsgroup newspapers unlawfully engaged more than 100 private investigators over at least 16 years on more than 35,000 occasions. This happened as much at The Sun as it did at the News of the World, with the knowledge of all the editors and executives going to the very top of the company. What's even worse is that in the wake of the 2006 arrest of a royal correspondent, there was an extensive conspiracy to cover up what had really been going on and who knew about it. Senior executives deliberately obstructed justice by deleting over 30 million emails, destroying backup tapes, and making false denials, all in the face of an ongoing police investigation. They then repeatedly lied under oath to cover their tracks, both in court and at the Leveson public inquiry. At her trial in 2014, Rebecca Brooks said, "When I was editor of The Sun, we ran a clean ship." Now, 10 years later, when she is CEO of the company, they now admit when she was editor of The Sun, they ran a criminal enterprise. Far from being relics of a distant past, many of those behind these unlawful practices remain firmly entrenched in senior positions today, both within News UK and other media outlets across the world, wielding editorial power and perpetuating the toxic culture in which they continue to thrive. It's perhaps no surprise that all of their senior executives and editors refused to turn up to court to give evidence. The failure of each of these key individuals to come and answer questions under oath spoke volumes in itself, but their collective silence is deafening. Today's result has been achieved only through the sheer resilience of Prince Harry and Tom Watson, whose willingness to take newsgroup newspapers to trial has led directly to this historic admission of unlawfulness at The Sun. It has only been by taking newsgroup not just to the steps of court, but inside the courtroom itself, that these claimants have finally managed to extract this historic admission of guilt. As a direct result of him taking a stand, Prince Harry and his immediate family have also had to repeatedly withstand aggressive and vengeful coverage since starting his claim over 5 years ago. This has created serious concerns for the security of him and his family. The rule of law must now run its full course. Prince Harry and Tom Watson join others in calling for the police and Parliament to investigate not only the unlawful activity now finally admitted, but the perjury and cover-ups along the way. It is clear now that this has occurred throughout this process, including through sworn evidence in inquiries and court hearings, in testimony to Parliament, and until today's final collapse of Newsgroup's defence. Today, the lies are laid bare. Today, the cover-ups are exposed, and today proves that no one stands above the law. The time for accountability has arrived. Thank you very much.
Mr. Sherborne, Prince Harry said he wanted accountability.
Expecting Tom Watson to make a statement as well, actually. I think that's probably going to be imminent. But the counsel for Tom Watson and Prince Harry there, David Sherborne, making clear what a big deal this is. Here's Tom Watson.
I wish they had left my family alone. But what happened, happened. Today, I'm glad they have finally accepted responsibility. I'm glad they've apologised and acknowledged the direct harm caused by years of unlawful surveillance by their journalists and their army of private investigators, not just to my family, but to Prince Harry and his. As the formidable Mr. Sherborne and my diligent solicitor, Ellen Gallagher, and our impressive team of lawyers at Hamlins have showed, in over 1,300 civil cases, these unlawful practices were not isolated incidents. They were industrial in scale and central to the modus operandi of News Group newspapers as a whole. I once said that the big beasts of the tabloid jungle have no predators. I was wrong. They have Prince Harry. His bravery and astonishing courage have brought accountability to a part of the media world that thought it was untouchable. I am sure I speak on behalf of the thousands of victims when I say we are grateful to him for his unwavering support and his determination under extraordinary pressure. If Rupert Murdoch had any decency, he should follow this corporate admission of guilt with a personal apology to Prince Harry, to his father our king, and to the countless others who suffered the same unlawful behaviour at the hands of his media empire. News Group newspapers owes so many such apologies. Thousands of ordinary people just trying to live their lives have endured the same unlawful behaviour. Many were victims of heinous crimes, including victims of terrorism, grieving families, and people caught in personal tragedies. I'll never get over some of the stories I've heard in this case. I owe some apologies too. This saga has placed an unforgivable strain on the people in my life. From my former wife Siobhan, mother to my beautiful children, to my wider family and friends. I am sorry that Rebecca Brooks decided you were just collateral damage in their corporate war on the elected representatives who sought their accountability. This fight has made me reflect on what it means to settle. Legally, it's a technical term. Emotionally, it's much deeper. I wish I could bring justice for everyone News Group newspapers has ruined and bullied, but I can't. Our system remains stacked against victims in favour of the powerful. So what does this case mean? Why is it so important? As the United Kingdom continues to witness tragic crimes and terrible atrocities, at least we know now that because of the work of my solicitor Ellen Gallagher and lawyers like her, victims and their loved ones are unlikely to have their phones hacked or their medical records stolen by tabloid newspapers, as routinely used to happen. At the heart of this case, and all the 1,300 others, is the important principle that no one is above the law. And in this sense, today's result represents a challenge to the criminal justice system. I finish with two questions. To Sir Mark Rowley, when you receive our dossier exposing wrongdoing, will the Metropolitan Police act? To the Prime Minister, I know you care deeply about fairness and the law, but are we really willing to continue as a country where some corporate executives are above the law and out of the reach of the police? Thank you.
Lord Watson there on the steps of the High Court alongside the barrister David Sherborne, who has undertaken several of these cases. We've continued to pick over this. I think, if you'd allow me one moment, people minded to defend Rupert Murdoch, or indeed to claim that Prince Harry had, as a couple of my more intellectually challenged texters had tried to do earlier, I should say sorry, probably, because now that you've heard that, you can't pretend anymore. Maybe on the strength of a combination of your ignorance and that original statement, you sort of thought there was some case for arguing that Prince Harry has taken the money and run or something like that. But now you've heard those two statements from David Sherborne and Tom Watson, and you've had some of the finer points of both the law and the scale of this admission explained to you, then obviously you're not going to be able to continue to pretend that this is anything other than an absolutely extraordinary victory for Prince Harry over the single most powerful media mogul of the last 100 years, and all of his lieutenants, current and former, in this country. And when I say, of course, that you're not going to be able to continue to pretend, I should probably add, unless you're a Donald Trump fan.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:27. Obviously, with breaking news, the timings are all over the place today, so the news is coming up in a couple of minutes. It gives me just a little bit of time to retrospectively reflect upon the conversation I had with Fraser earlier, and wording whether it was the scale of the apology and not least the admission of illegality, but also the wording of it that has prevented this case from going ahead. I'd say that argument is now about 99% confirmed, not least because of the calls by both of those speakers for the police to get involved. For the avoidance of doubt, the 2006 arrests that are referred to in the apology, where they acknowledge that the company's response was regrettable. The company's response and subsequent actions were regrettable. What we learned from the lawyer's statement was that, in his words, there was an extensive conspiracy to cover up what really had been going on and who knew about it. Senior executives deliberately obstructed justice by deleting over 30 million emails, destroying backup tapes and making false denials, all in the face of an ongoing police investigation. They then repeatedly lied under oath to cover their tracks, both in court and at the Leveson public inquiry. The lawyer also going on to say that at her trial in 2014, Rebecca Brooks said, "When I was editor of The Sun, we ran a clean ship." Now, 10 years later, when she is CEO of the company, they now admit when she was editor of The Sun, they ran a criminal enterprise. Also going on to praise the plaintiffs. Today's result has been achieved only through the sheer resilience of Prince Harry and Lord Watson. Again, I can retrospectively reflect on the role that this experience played on the collapse of Tom Watson's marriage, and then he alluded to it, of course, himself in terms and tone that a lot of you are telling me sent shivers down your spine, the goosebumps a couple of you describing. Think about what it's like to have this sort of enemy coming for you for the crime of what? In Tom Watson's case, for the crime of actually trying to find out more about the phone hacking. In Prince Harry's case, for the crime. How old would he have been when it started? So 1996, if he's 40 now. How old would he have been when it started? So 14. Good Lord. Good Lord. We'll talk to Evan Harris from Hacked Off after the news with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where it's quite a week for news, isn't it? But the big story today, and I think even somebody like me who's followed events quite closely and hopes to understand almost all of them, has been slightly taken aback, not as much by the actual apology to the claimants, which was pretty hefty, as by the statements read on the steps of the High Court by the counsel for the Duke of Sussex and Lord Watson. And of course, what that did was raise the prospect of future prosecutions moving forward. So before, briefly, we talked to Dr. Evan Harris, the former director of Hacked Off and consultant to the claimant's legal team. I would remind you that those events of 2006 referred to both in the apology and, crucially, in the lawyer's speech, saw the royal correspondent go to jail and the launch of what became known as the one rogue reporter defence, a defence which had already fallen to pieces, but now the pieces have been absolutely blown apart. 11:35 is the time. Evan Harris joins me now. I suppose, Evan, I should begin by pointing out that you've also spent much of your life in recent years pursuing this moment, so I'll begin by asking how you feel, if I may.
Well, I feel it's an important step on the way, but it's not the end of the matter. But, it's taken 10 years, more than that, to get News UK to admit that there was unlawful activity at the Sun. Our allegations are that it was vast. The statement pointed out that there were 35,000 payments to private investigators, at least, across the Sun and the News of the World. And, of course, the Sun publishes 6 times as often as the News of the World did. And that over 100 private investigators were identified by the claimants as having been used. And here's News UK saying that these private investigators working for the Sun broke the law. So that's an important step on the way, because it's been 10 years of denials. But as you rightly say, there's consequences of that, not just in terms of other actions, civil actions, but if those denials have been made in court, or at the Leveson inquiry under oath, or to parliamentary select committees, and they were wrong, there has to be an investigation of whether they were deliberately wrong, and therefore that is perjury, a breach of the Inquiries Act, and contempt of Parliament. And then you've got to look at whether there has yet been, and the answer is no, an adequate police investigation, not only of the unlawful activity on a vast scale by the Sun, but also whether there was perjury and other forms of illegal statements that are false under oath. And, of course, the allegations that we've made that as part of that concealment, the cover-up, which is always worse than the crime, there was destruction of evidence, deletion of millions of emails during a police inquiry. And we say, as those statements said, that the police cannot leave it there when it looks like there was deletion of emails in the face of their inquiry, because otherwise we have impunity for large media organisations, and we don't have the rule of law, and we're not America yet.
I have to respond by saying, well, everything you've just said is true, but they can not investigate further, and there's no consequences for them failing or refusing to do so.
Yes, there is.
Go on.
So a decision by the authorities, whether that be the police or the prosecution, not to prosecute, can be judicially reviewed in the case of the police, and there's a victim right to review in relation to prosecution decisions and or judicial review. And there's also the prospect of a private prosecution, which would instigate action, and then that would require the Director of Public Prosecutions to decide whether they were going to let that continue or take it over themselves or seek to block it, again, judicially reviewable. So and obviously those are legal actions. Legal actions aren't cheap, but I think there's enough groundswell of support in this country for the actions and the campaigns of Hacked Off and others to support such action to ensure that there is no more of this permitted cover-up.
So it's lever. I mean, it would involve, as you say, legal action to put pressure on the authorities to do what they could do.
I hope not.
No, I see what you mean. So you hope they do it off their own back.
Correct.
To be clear, some of these offences are the same offences that Neville Thurlbeck and Andy Coulson were jailed for.
Well, they're similar type offences. Yes, that's right. I mean, sorry, the original offences, yes, of voicemail interception in that case were attracted custodial sentences in those cases, short custodial sentences.
Yes.
Perverting the course of justice, which is the destruction of evidence, entails longer sentences than that. It's a more serious offence. We saw that occur with one News UK favourite journalist, Mazza Mahmood, the so-called fake sheikh, who was just a criminal who lied and perjured himself, and he got a 16-month sentence. And so these are serious offences. You could argue that, is it worth looking at, the odd private investigator activity 15 years ago, 20 years ago? It's not just about that, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
And no one's interested from our side, particularly interested in the foot soldiers or the private investigators who are doing what they were paid to do. It's who authorised it.
It's the generals.
Who encouraged
it's the generals.
And then who covered it up, yes.
And that you
And there must be journalist whistleblowers out there who knew what happened, and we just encourage them to come forward, because there will be no consequence to the individuals who are involved at the street level, as it were. The target is legitimately those people who are executives at the time, and in many cases still are, wielding power and influence over the narrative in this country, both media and political.
Again, to clarify with your help, the activities to which the Sun has admitted today for the first time are activities that, when the News of the World was found to have committed them, that was the grounds upon which Rupert Murdoch shut down the News of the World.
Yes, I don't think he shut down the News of the World because he was appalled ethically. I don't think he was actually surprised.
No, it's because he was caught.
He knew.
It's because his people were caught.
Withdrew. Well, yes. I think there were two reasons.
Right.
Advertisers withdrew, and therefore he wasn't going to be able to make money. And secondly, he thought he could deal with the PR, this is my guess, problem, and help it go away by saying, look, I've closed the paper. But of course, it's re-emerged as the Sun on Sunday, edited at that time and now by Victoria Newton, who is alleged to have been it's denied, alleged to have been involved in this activity, both the original activity, she was a Sun journalist and a News of the World journalist, and the cover-up. And she needs to be asked when she appears on the media, what's your reaction to the fact that your own company has said that the Sun did this while you worked for them? Will she be asked? Will Laura Kuenssberg ever ask her that question?
Yeah.
Let's see. Could have a little drinking bet on that.
I think that was close to rhetorical, wasn't it, Evan?
It was, of course.
Laura is
invite
always...
her on your programme.
Look, the door is always open, Evan, but Laura is always free to prove us both wrong on that front. So the prospect of the Sun being shut down tomorrow is pretty slim.
Yes.
And the case continues. Go on.
Actually, we're not calling. There's a place for tabloid journalism and for the sort of content that the Sun and other newspapers and websites do. None of us in the campaign are against showbiz journalism or celebrity journalism.
Of course, I used to be one.
They do excellent sports coverage and TV coverage, and they sometimes, if they bothered to put their resources into investigative journalism, can do good investigative journalism. No one wants to see newspapers closed down in this country.
A great point.
It's the proprietor that closed the News of the World, not the campaignners, not Millie
Just
Dowler.
don't break the law. We just don't want the law to be broken.
Yes, and don't sack journalists, sack the executives.
A word, if you would, on why the case didn't progress. What is the sort of legal technicalities on the relationship between the nature, the tone, and the scale of the apology? What's more important? Go on.
Yes, well, you and I have often discussed, and I'm not going to repeat it at length, because you have regular listeners who will have heard this.
Yes.
When it comes to damages, if you can't beat the offer you're made by way of settlement, then you're liable for all the court costs because you needn't have gone to trial. That's on damages. If you are suing because you allege that there was unlawful activity at the Sun and they admit it before the trial begins, right?
Yes.
Then you can't really be blamed for the court saying you got what you wanted by admission. You didn't need to take eight weeks of court time to do it, and you will have to pay the costs of that. Now, you might say, well, what about the other allegations of perjury and destruction of evidence? That hasn't been admitted yet. In British tort law, the tort is misuse of private information. That's the harm that you're suing over.
Right.
The perjury and concealment and destruction of evidence is aggravation, and that piggybacks on a claim of misuse of private information. It's not a cause of action, to use a legal term, in itself. Therefore, you couldn't go forward with a claim of just the aggravation when you've already had satisfaction. And it is satisfaction, given the figures that are being bandied around, with the admission and the damages for what's happened to you. That's my quickest way I can explain.
That's beautifully explained. Although, of course, it won't touch the sides of the lies and propaganda that are already being promulgated by various Rupert Murdoch lackeys and apologists who will want to portray Prince Harry as somehow having balked at the final hurdle. The point is that the News Group newspapers have admitted the main charge, as it were.
Yeah, they blinked first.
So they've admitted the main charge, which makes the judge's enthusiasm for allowing the case to continue disappear.
Well, we could litigate something they've already admitted, but it's pointless. And it would be why would you want to give Rupert Murdoch millions of pounds and not say, yes, okay, you've admitted it? And it's probably better to admit it than for a judge to find it, because they can contest and argue the judge was wrong. But I don't think even they can argue that their own admission was false, because that would reopen the litigation.
So not for the first time we find ourselves in a space where if you genuinely understand the facts, you can arrive at only one conclusion, what has happened, but we wait to see who pops up on various television programmes and in various newspaper columns arguing that black is white, that up is down, or indeed that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. Daily Mail next.
Daily Mail carries on. It is at an earlier stage.
Yes.
It's hard for me to say, both because of my position in the legal team there, and because I don't know how that's going, which is always comfort.
Yes.
How this is going to evolve. All I can say is that they are making the same aggressive denials, possibly even more aggressively in their own inevitable style, than News Group, News UK did at the time, and their denials are such that it's hard to see them admitting or settling. But again, watch this space.
Who knows?
The News Group were able to say, we admit the News of the World, here's some money, we're not admitting the Sun.
Yeah.
Daily Mail deny everything. Therefore, it's hard for them to make what they call a commercial settlement, because it will, I'm sure it's possible, but it would look odd set against the absolute vehement denials. You can
which they continue to make, we should be clear. Yes, absolutely. They continue to make all of those denials. Champagne corks popping later today down at Hacktoff?
I'm a man of moderate, yes.
Dr. Evan Harris, former director of Hacktoff and consultant to the claimants' legal team in the News Group litigation, responding to this absolutely extraordinary moment in British history. And I don't use that word excessively, because it's about a clash between two of the most powerful institutions in our islands, the media, the Fourth Estate, and a royal, a very, very senior member of the royal family. And let's just say it didn't go to the judges, this one. It's a technical knockout in the 12th round. And the only man with his arm in the air at the moment the only men with their arms in the air in that particular boxing ring are Prince Harry and Tom Watson.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:51 is the time. Mark Stevens is an international media lawyer and often a very helpful guide through the weeds of legal questions. He joins me now in no prizes for guessing why. I'll begin just with your professional expertise. I'll ask whether you're surprised by the events of this morning.
I'm not surprised. I mean, it was clear yesterday that somebody had blinked. We now realise that was News UK. Essentially, Harry has said that he wanted admissions and explanations of wrongdoing. He's now had that. News UK's apology says that it admits phone hacking by the News of the World journalists and unlawful activities carried out by the private investigators for The Sun. Where the negotiations were, I think, is around the question of whether or not there was unlawful behaviour through the deletion of emails, the covering up of evidence and that kind of thing. And those are matters which have been referred, at least in Tom Watson's case, to the police. So I think that News International have done the best damage mitigation that they could, but there's absolutely no doubt that this is a comprehensive vindication for Prince Harry taking the case, and Tom Watson, and it's obvious that they are the victors here.
I don't think we say comprehensive. I think the word of the day is unequivocal, Mark.
Yes, it's an unequivocal, comprehensive victory.
And it's not the end of the story, though. As you say, Tom Watson has referred to police. David Sherborne certainly seems to think that there should be further investigations. A word on the plausibility of that, the appetite for that from the Met?
I think there's no appetite to look at the unlawful news gathering. We know that this is a problem of the past. It doesn't happen anymore. I think most people, despite the absence of a court ruling against News International, had accepted that there was wrongdoing there. I mean, that's why do they pay out 11 billion without there being something wrong? So, but it isn't ongoing anymore, and so I think it is right to draw a line. We have had trials, you remember, at the Old Bailey, Rebecca Brooks, Andy Coulson, etc. But so I think the police have spent enough time and money on this, and their precious resources could be dealing with problems of today, anti-terror, and strange young men in their bedrooms.
What about perjury and cover-up as opposed to illegal news gathering?
Perjury is almost impossible to prove, and I think because you're asking about the state of a mind, you've got to show that someone knew the truth and deliberately told a lie, and invariably people say they were mistaken or they were in error or they were stupid, but not knaves. And in this particular case, I think it's almost a racing certainty that although the police will have to look at it, they'll probably refer it to the Director of Public Prosecutions, it's almost certain that nothing will follow from that. So I think this is the full stop at the end of the phone hacking story. There will, of course, be a little bit of afters, as there always is. You're seeing both parties sledge one another, and there will be these other bits and pieces that are thrown around. But I think this is the end of the phone hacking saga.
Well, David Sherborne would disagree, or is this the performance element of the barrister's role on the steps of the High Court, calling for the rule of law to run its full course, calling for police and Parliament to investigate the unlawful activity now finally admitted, but the perjury and cover-ups along the way? It's clear now that this has occurred throughout this process, including sworn evidence in inquiries and court hearings and in testimony to Parliament until today's final collapse of NGN's defence.
Well, I mean, all of that, I think, is probably accurate. The question is, although, I think just looking at it in human terms, this case was about Prince Harry having cut relationships because he believed they were leaking from him. The same with Tom Watson, and that, I think, was the very human basis of this case for Prince Harry. He's now got an acknowledgement of the wrongdoing. He couldn't really get very much more out of these hearings, which were about 120 articles. And the question remains, obviously, is there worth a second part of Leveson? Is there worth further inquiries? And I think people understand there's been a degree of accountability wherever the wrongdoing has lay, and perhaps our priorities lie in other directions at this particular point in time. And I think the public policy will allow us to move on without forgetting, of course, and acknowledging the major victory for Prince Harry and David Sherborne today.
Although, and finally, the major victory, although evident to anybody honest who understands all of the facts, will be denied by precisely the sort of people who might be reined in by a second Leveson inquiry. I don't know what coverage we're going to read tomorrow, but I'd point out briefly that the current editor of The Times used to edit The Sun. So I don't know where we're going to turn for, what's the word I'm looking for, remorseful representation from the Fourth Estate.
Well, I suspect we'll get more reasoned coverage in The Guardian and perhaps some of the foreign newspapers.
New York Times will be all over this, won't they?
Yeah, but they've been independent on this all the way through. But I think that, the real tell here is, does the Murdoch media take further revenge on Prince Harry, as Harry thinks the Mail has done, and do they continue to give him appalling coverage? Or will there be a sort of, after this flurry of denials and hubris, will there be some kind of truce called? I think a truce would be sensible from all parties.
That's a good question, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Mark Stevens, international media lawyer, just reminding us at the end there for a large part of the reason why Rupert Murdoch's empire has gone after Prince Harry like a rat up a drainpipe in recent years. If the time wasn't so tight, I'd remind you of that extraordinary juxtaposition of events where Kate Middleton and Meghan Markle were reported to have done identical things and according to which one it was, the tone of the reporting was polar opposite. My favourite being the bouquet of flowers that they adopted for their bridesmaids at the wedding, and that the same flower prompted Kate Middleton's wedding to be reported in terms such as a lovely nod to tradition and a fragrant reminder of times past, or words to that effect, whereas Meghan Markle said Meghan puts bridesmaids' life at risk with poisonous flower. It was the same flower. And that's only one example. So if you've ever wondered why, if you don't, I mean, obviously a large part of it was that the senior member of the royal family had the audacity to fall in love with a woman of colour, which, as we are seeing among supporters of Donald Trump and beyond, is clearly something that's unacceptable to a certain type of senior media figure in this country. So that explanation aside, if you've ever wondered why they've got so much hatred, apparent hatred for Prince Harry, and are so keen for you and your Auntie Doris on Facebook to hate Prince Harry, today is your most potent explanation yet. We turn now to PMQs. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, joins me. More even, perhaps, than in previous weeks. I don't know where Kemi Badenoch might go this afternoon.
Well, it does feel like, James, that we've been talking about Southport all week, and I do feel like that is the obvious answer for her to go in on PMQs this week. The obvious state failings that Keir Starmer talked about at his press conference earlier this week, which obviously he admitted. But of course, the Tories' argument is who knew what when, and did you do enough? Did Keir Starmer do enough to talk about the details that we now know have emerged of the link to terrorism, of the ricin that was found in his flat, and why that wasn't emerged to the public earlier. Now, lots of other critics will say there is nothing we could have done to avoid that. We didn't want to contempt the court case. We didn't want to put any of that at risk. But there is questions about why the police have actually said this in the past couple of days, that the CPS have told them at the time, we didn't want you to say more. And of course, Keir Starmer is swirled up in all of this. He's formerly the Director of Public Prosecution. So I imagine that might be an argument that Kemi Badenoch wants to know. A wild card option today, I'm told by a little birdie who works close to Kemi Badenoch, is potentially education. The Tories have been facing quite a bit of a backlash on their schools bill. So that could be something that might pop up as well.
Anything else?
Well, we've had some economy borrowing figures. I think if it were me, I'd be going on Heathrow splits. It's really flushed out into the open today.
My boat. Does it float your boat?
Yeah,
or do you think
so.
The split is genuine? The split floats your boat?
Yeah.
Whether or not they build a new runway or not.
And also,
I live under it. I don't really care.
Sure, but I think it divides opinion amongst a lot of people, amongst a lot of politicians.
For a heap of reasons.
It goes into this argument about growth, that Rachel Reeves wants to get growth. She needs to get the economy going. But how on earth is she going to do it? People like Keir Starmer, people like Ed Miliband voted against Heathrow expansion repeatedly in the past. They are now going to turn around and say, well, actually, it's worth doing in the benefit of the economy. So Kemi Badenoch gets to stand up and say, are you guys hypocrites if you turn around and do this? But Rachel Reeves has said this morning at Davos, all of these things, growth is going to have to be the one that trumps that. So I think it could be a good opportunity for her to put the boot in, but I'm not sure she's going to go there.
Where did the story come from, the Heathrow story? Has it been said out loud? Has it been explicitly stated that this is what she's going to do?
Yeah, so it was a Bloomberg report a couple of days ago.
Okay.
And it wasn't denied by sources in the Treasury. And this morning, Rachel Reeves has been speaking in Davos and essentially confirmed that story. She said that growth has to trump that in a direct response to a question about Heathrow.
I thought it was already done and dusted, the third runway. I thought that Johnson was supposed to lie down in front of the bulldozers to stop it from happening, and he mysteriously cleared off out of the country on the day when it was voted through.
Yeah, flying to Afghanistan and costing the taxpayer £20,000 in order to do so.
Your memory's better than mine on this one.
But yes, it's not quite happened yet. Basically, the government said they would drop their opposition, but there is no current planning application from Heathrow that's in the pipeline at the moment. There is, however, still one in the pipeline for Gatwick and for Luton, and allegedly the government are willing to put those two aside as well, all in the name of growth.
How, and you obviously know a heck of a lot more about this than I do, because I don't know any of them, either socially or professionally, but how concerned are Tory MPs getting about Kemi Badenoch's A, performances at PMQs, and B, polling?
I think the polling, definitely. We're now in an effectively 3/4 party state, as we were talking about last week, in terms of those polls. I think the Tories and MPs that I've been speaking to are willing to give her the benefit of the doubt on Prime Minister's questions in the hope that things do get to improve a bit more. She is only a few weeks into this job, or a few months into this job, and
she obviously thinks she's brilliant.
Well, I think there are some on the Tory backbenchers that disagree.
Well, that's what I would be worried about. I wouldn't be worried about that she's new, she's wet behind the ears, she's going to get better. I'd be worried that she obviously already thinks she's brilliant, and yet the evidence of our eyes and ears is...
Yeah, and look, there are obviously open questions in the Conservative Party about how long she's going to last. We've talked about this before, but I think she's out of the woods for now, and they are going to give her a decent crack of the whip, a decent chance to try and get into this. But you heard her speaking on LBC last week about how her policy platforms are going to take 2 years before she sorts them out. I don't think the Tory Party is going to wait 2 years for her to get her ideas, for her to get her policy platform sorted out. And I think they will be looking for her to show at least some gains in the polls in the next couple of months. And if not, they're going to start to ask them questions about why.
Any mention of Trump, do you think? I can't see a way in, but it has been quite a big story this week.
It has been a big story, but equally, you remember that wild card week with Kemi Badenoch where she decided to go on Trump, and both of us agreed that it did not work for her at all. And we know how unpopular Donald Trump is generally among the British people.
And that's probably going to get worse. I mean, tricky for Badenoch now to have publicly offered her enormous admiration of Elon Musk and obviously tried to ally her Conservative Party to Donald Trump's Republican Party as they embark upon a programme of releasing prisoners who are guilty, not because the prisons are full, which is what Conservative policy forced the last government and the current government into doing, releasing prisoners early, but actually, in Donald Trump's case, people that attack the Capitol getting actually pardoned. They cease to have criminal records. So not necessarily something the Party of Law and Order would want to be allied with.
No, and Keir Starmer earlier this week and last week at his press conferences repeatedly had swiped at Elon Musk and has distanced himself from that. We had a bit of a joke earlier from Rachel Reeves at Davos. She said, "I'm not going." She said, "I'm not going to troll."
First.
I know. She can be funny actually. She said something like, "I'm not going to troll the president" or something in a reference to Elon Musk. So the government very clear in their condemnation of Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Elon Musk rather than not Donald Trump. Equally, David Lammy said earlier this week that he does expect to be making a visit, and Keir Starmer to be making a visit to Donald Trump in the coming weeks. So, they're going to have to continue to play nice on the world stage.
I mean, they certainly are. And, of course, they'll be in the room where it happens, unlike the leader of Reform UK Limited earlier this week, who
isn't it a real shame?
Didn't get into the...
Yeah.
I thought they were like brothers. I thought they were joined at the hip.
I know.
Who was there from the British political establishment?
2 peas in a pod. From the British, from our government, only the US outgoing ambassador.
Boris Johnson was there. Anyway, here's PMQs.
Mr. Speaker, can I take this opportunity to welcome the release of hostages, including Emily Damari, from barbaric captivity? I also know that the thoughts of many will be with the victims of the Southport killings. There are important questions to answer, and I will return to those after the case is concluded. Between 2009 and 2022, the OECD found children in England rose up global league tables in maths, reading, and science. Conservative government action means English schools now top the Western world at maths and reading. The Prime Minister's Schools Bill, which is being voted on in committee this week, reverses the improvements that made this happen. This bill is an act of vandalism. It is wrecking a cross-party consensus that lasted for decades. Why does the Prime Minister think that so many school leaders are criticising this bill?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it was Labour that introduced academies in the first place to drive up standards. Academies are here to stay and will continue to drive up standards. That's what the bill is about. But also in that bill are important provisions for protecting children, including a provision to stop abusers taking children out of school, a unique identifier to ensure the whereabouts of all children are known. What did the Leader of the Opposition do? She instructed all of them to vote against those measures.
He didn't even bother voting on that bill, Mr. Speaker. And he talks about safeguarding measures. That's not what the issue is. It's about the reforms that he is changing. We have an example of where these reforms were not introduced. Wales, which has been under Labour control for 2 decades. Welsh educational outcomes have tumbled down international league tables. Poor children in England now do better than wealthier children in Wales. This bill denies children the guarantee that their failing schools will be turned into a better academy. It is an attack on excellence, it is an attack on higher standards, it is an attack on aspiration. This bill is the worst of socialism, Mr. Speaker, and isn't it deprived children in England who will pay the price?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we introduced academies, we're committed to them, we're driving standards up. But this bill is important because it also sets up breakfast clubs for the very children that she claims to champion. It limits the expense of school uniform and it puts in place vital protections for children. She has to answer the question, why did she instruct all of them to vote against child protection measures?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister thinks that he can distract people from what is wrong with this bill. This is not about breakfast clubs and school uniforms. Teachers and parents will be horrified at just how bad this bill is. Even his own MPs may not realise it, but the bill will cut teachers' pay. It cuts pay for 20,000 teachers. His education secretary says there is not a ceiling for pay. They're all shaking their heads. They clearly haven't read the bill. She hasn't read the bill either. Because Clause 45 means teachers' pay will be capped. Did the Prime Minister know that the bill as it stands will cut teachers' pay?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we do need flexibility in our schools. And if she'd hopped off social media for a while, she would have seen the amendment that was put down this morning to achieve that end. But she says this bill is not about child protection. We had a young child killed who was taken out of a school by an abuser. This bill closes that gap. That is urgently needed. We have children who have not gone back to school since COVID. This bill closes that gap. She can make her points on academies, we can debate academies, but to vote against the bill is a disgrace on all of them.
This is nonsense, Mr. Speaker, and the amendment he's talking about does not address this issue. He raises academies, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like every other parent, I believe all our children should have the best teachers. Apart from cutting their pay, listen to what the head of Year 11, Mr. Speaker, at Michaela, the head of Year 11 at Michaela, the most successful school in the country, came from the armed forces. The headmistress says that with Labour's new rules, she would never have been able to hire him. Those are the academy freedoms I'm talking about. This bill would have blocked that veteran from teaching. The bill implies that doctors are not sufficiently qualified to teach biology, that Olympic medalists can't teach PE. Why is the Prime Minister closing down routes into teaching when we should be opening up more?
She knows that's not right. No, it's not. Look at the provisions in the bill. But to say there ought to be qualified teachers in our schools should not be extraordinary or opposed. And we had far too many examples in our secondary schools under their watch of teachers missing when we needed maths teachers. They championed maths. We didn't have enough maths teachers in our secondary schools, and I want every single child to have the best possible education.
The facts speak for themselves. The standards went up under Conservative governments. What we need to know is who is benefiting. Mr. Speaker, everyone is asking, who is benefiting from these changes? It's not teachers. Their pay is being capped. It's not parents. Their choices are being restricted. It's definitely not children. Their outcomes will get worse. So who is benefiting? It's the trade unions. The National Education Union sent out a tick list proving that after a decade and a half, they are finally getting their way. Why is the Education Secretary allowing trade unions to run her department and ruin children's education?
The bill benefits the children who need the nourishment of a breakfast club. The bill benefits the families that can't afford uniforms. The bill benefits the children who are currently out of school and nobody knows where they are. The bill benefits the children who could be taken out of school by abusers if this bill doesn't go through. She should change her mind and support these vital provisions.
The Prime Minister needs to get out more and speak to schools. I was at the Harris Academy just this month, and what are they saying? That this bill reverses 2 decades of progress. Imposing Labour's new curriculum on every school, taxing the education of children with special needs, excluding talented outsiders. The closed shop is back. This is pure educational vandalism. And alongside these attacks, removing single-word Ofsted judgments so parents cannot see the standards slipping. It is the same old Labour. Bad outcomes for all children, excellence for none. Mr. Speaker, I know what it's like to go to a school which didn't care about standards. This is a tragedy in the making. The key changes in this bill were not in their election manifesto. Isn't that because he knew parents and teachers would reject them?
Parents and teachers know we introduced academies. Parents and teachers know we're driving by standards. We're committed to them. They're part of the future. We will continue to focus on standards. And she talks about special needs. She's got a nerve. I don't know. And they know it. Remember, they have asked me questions, these Prime Minister's questions, about the appalling situation of special needs under their watch. We're going to fix that mess like we're fixing every other mess.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parents should feel confident that when their child is sick, they can take them to their local hospital to be treated as soon as possible. But last year, when my son was having difficulty breathing, like many parents, I couldn't take him to the Alexandra Hospital in Redditch, as paediatric services were temporarily closed in 2016 and have never been reinstated. As part of this government's record investment into our NHS, would the Prime Minister agree to meet with me to explore ways to enable local integrated care boards to reinstate critical services for growing towns like Redditch?
Prime Minister. Well, I thank him for raising this important issue, and I know he's campaigned on it for a very long time. We are putting, Mr. Speaker, a record £25 billion investment into the NHS as part of our plan for change. Building an NHS fit for the future means places like Redditch will see lower waiting lists and services that reflect their needs. Whilst, Mr. Speaker, responsibility over service rests with the appropriate NHS Commissioner, I will ensure that he gets a meeting with the relevant Minister to discuss the issues.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the Prime Minister's opening remarks about the Southport killings and the Holocaust Memorial Day? Can I particularly join him in expressing our immense relief at the release of Emily Damari and celebrate the fact she's back with her mum, Mandy, and the rest of her family. Let's hope we can get all the hostages released as soon as possible and the ceasefire turns into a lasting peace. Mr. Speaker, last week I urged the Prime Minister to speed up the Social Care Commission so we can get the changes people need implemented this year. The very next day, it was announced that the chair of the Social Care Commission was also going to chair another important inquiry into grooming gangs. Yes. So the Prime Minister says that the job of chairing the Social Care Commission is so enormous that it's not possible to complete it within 3 years. Yet he also says that the chair of that commission, Baroness Casey, has got enough free time over the next few months to chair another inquiry. Very good point. Can the Prime Minister explain how both these things can be true?
Mr. Speaker, Baroness Casey is well placed to conduct the audit into grooming gangs, given her hard-hitting report on exploitation in Rotherham. It does not, he raises the issue, it does not affect her work on the Independent Commission on Adult Social Care, which begins in April. But as he knows, that report the first part of that report will report next year, so we can deliver recommendations as we receive them. And he knows that already we're introducing fair pay agreements, providing more money for the social care funding, and putting up the allowance. So we're already taking steps. There'll be a two-part report. We will act on the recommendations as they arrive, but this needs to be done properly.
Sir Ed Davey.
I still don't think the Prime Minister is making social care reform the priority that it needs. It's urgent. And so I'm going to keep coming back to this and holding to account. But, Mr. Speaker, turning now to the United States, can the Prime Minister guarantee that he will not sell out Britain's fantastic farmers to Donald Trump in a trade deal that undermines our high food and animal welfare standards in the way that the Conservatives sold them out in the Australia and New Zealand deals?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will work with the US, we will work with other countries, but we will never lower our standards.
Durham Parfait.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of my constituents across Southamptonshire have
18 minutes after 12 is the time. I'm now going to have to swat up furiously on this education bill. Happily, Natasha Clark, I'm sure, is already fully across all of the facts, and we shall discover some of them after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 is the time. This is I should have Anorak Corner, not just Idiot's Corner, because Kevin has made a perfectly valid point, which is entirely forgivable. But because I am an Anorak, living in Anorak's Corner, I have to actually correct him. So Kevin says, hilarious that Badenoch should cite her visit to a Harris Academy when the controlling interest is held by Lord Harris, a well-known Tory. Actually, because my brain works in mysterious ways and I have so little faith in Fleet Street and newspapers, I follow a lot of trade and specialist media. And I remembered when I read that from Kevin that back in July of last year, Lord Harris came out and revealed that he'd switched his allegiances from Conservative to Labour. It was significant because he was described by Michael Gove as a hero. He was his hero, but Michael Gove's hero switched to Labour in July of last year. I'll leave you to speculate. Actually, no, I think he may have written the article for the Times, if we're going to be fair. And we should be, frankly. Natasha Clark is here. So I think that you did suggest that education would come up, but as something of a wild card, whereas, once again, she spent all 6 questions on a subject that isn't necessarily understood by many people.
Yeah, not least of all you and I.
Well, speak for yourself. What do you want to know?
Okay.
No,
what's the name of the bill, James?
What's
the name of the bill?
The Education and Thingamy Bill.
Schools Wellbeing Bill. So this is quite it's obviously education is a wide topic, and I think that's why Kemi Badenoch's gone in on it, because it does have a lot of appeal to a lot of parents. And actually, under the Tories, arguably, there was a fairly good record to point to on education and school standards generally, amongst English and maths specifically, which is what she talked about in the first question, going up under the Tories. They're now in a huge row, the government and Labour that is, over this schools bill, which is a bit of, we call it a Christmas tree bill in Westminster because it includes so many different things and everybody decides to pin it all on one bill, and then you get the Conservatives saying they're going to vote against it. And then the Labour Party can say, you're voting against cheaper school uniforms, you're voting against free school meals, you're voting against this new out-of-school register so we can keep track of lost kids, and you're voting against all of these things. But actually, there have been some legitimate criticisms of this schools bill from education leaders, including those who are involved in the Harris Academy, including one of the Harris Academy's, Sir Dan Moynihan, which I'm told has expressed doubts about the national curriculum, which is a bit of, it opens up a bit of a row about sort of local versus national government. Should it be right that national government are telling every single school exactly what to teach, or should we give teachers more flexibility in what kind of things they should be teaching to kids? The other thing is about pay for workers. Now, obviously, Labour have said that they want to increase and they don't want any unqualified teachers to be working in schools. That was one of the promises they put forward in their manifesto. Last night, the government were forced to accept an amendment on this schools bill, which is going to clarify a little bit of some of the rows and the confusion about this, which will mean that there will be a floor and a ceiling for teachers' pay, which they hope is going to stem some of that criticism. So it's not completely unrelated to Westminster politics, and it is something that is actively being talked about in Westminster and in politics. But does it have a wider appeal to the electorate at hand? Does it have a wider appeal to you and I? It's a very niche topic, and it's quite detailed and quite technical.
I think a lot of homeschooling parents are worried. But again, I don't know what salience that has on the broader political stage.
Yeah, so obviously Sarah Sharif's uncle and father that kept her at home and used homeschooling rules to keep her out of the watch of her teachers is being used by Keir Starmer, and you heard him say you had him use that phrase at Prime Minister's Questions. This was a man that was a girl that was killed, that was taken out of school by her abuser, and this legislation will close that gap. Keir Starmer was pretty strong on this, actually, and I don't think it's particularly a topic that he usually talks about. So actually, I thought him at the very end was pretty good there, despite Kemi Badenoch saying he needed to get out more.
Why do you think she's doing that? That just made her sound a bit small, didn't it?
Come on, Keir Starmer's visited a school before.
Yeah.
We've all gone to a school.
Well, you say that. I think we all presumed when they were talking about the child sex abuse inquiries that Kemi Badenoch had at least met some survivors of child sex abuse,
turns
didn't
out.
we? And of course, it subsequently turned out that she hadn't. Ed Davey, we probably should talk about a little more. We usually ignore him. I mean, social care and Brexit are all he needs, really, for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, he could easily use social care and Brexit to keep bashing both the Labour Party and the Conservatives over the head with for the next 4 years, and I think very effectively too. Talking about a trade deal, Keir Starmer responded pretty short and sweet. We will not lower our standards on a trade deal. And actually, I was watching.
There's not going to be a trade deal. Whoever's in Downing Street, and whoever's in the White House, there's no interest in it for America because the balance of trade is so hugely skewed in their favour anyway.
Yeah, well, which is why Keir Starmer should be at least knocking on the door and asking for the trade talks to reopen, which obviously shut under Joe Biden. It wasn't not a priority for him, and I'm sure that if there is a trip to Washington anytime soon, that will be one of the first things on his list to talk about. But yes, it's not going to happen. A trade deal is not going to happen. The Conservatives have done as much as they can with these sort of mini sector by sector deals. I don't think they're going to get much closer.
Mini sector by deals.
Yeah.
Memorandums of understanding, weren't they? The ones that Kemi Badenoch signed that did absolutely nothing, that changed not a single jot of our trading relationship with America.
But it will open up this debate, though, for Keir Starmer, right? He wants to get close to the EU. Johnny Reynolds, the business secretary, talking today about closer alignment. Johnny, Jonathan, Johnny.
I didn't know that. I didn't know he was called Johnny. You live and learn. Carry on.
He was talking earlier about closer alignment with the European Union, and you've also got on one hand him also saying we want to talk about a trade deal. I don't think it's going to be possible for the government to do both. How are they going to be able to move close to the EU and also move close to the US at the same time? I think it's pie in the sky thinking from Labour.
He's going to have to choose. In fact, we'll talk more about the options open to him and the calls from Ed Davey for him to take one of them shortly with a bona fide trade expert. Interesting question from Michael. Badenoch goes on about teachers' pay and then demonises them for being in a union. I don't understand. She was sort of trying to have her cake and eat it on that front. Yeah,
look, it's classic. We talked loads about in our previous iterations of Prime Minister's Questions about the Jeremy Corbyn lever that Rishi Sunak used to pull.
Yes.
And I think for Kemi Badenoch, one of those levers is going to be the trade union lever instead. She's going to pull that when she feels like she's going to be able to make a good political point. So I think the National Education Union, she basically said that there is no one that's going to be benefiting from this. Who is benefiting? It's not teachers, it's not parents. Outcomes will be restricted. Who is going to benefit? It's going to be the unions, and they're going to ruin children's education. A pretty big
But by the unions,
there.
She means the teachers.
Well, exactly. They are. Firstly, they are the same
it's
people.
a union of what, Kemi? Someone might say.
National
and she'd
Union
go,
of...
you don't understand. You're not as clever as me.
You don't understand.
You
the
need to
unions.
get out more. You need to read some books. It's a union of things. And it's definitely not going to help the teachers. It's only going to help the unions of the teachers.
Yep.
Well done, Galaxy Brain. I'll answer that question I asked you earlier with a cunning clip from GBB's of all places.
Where you watched the inauguration, were you in the room? Were you in the rotunda?
No, didn't make the cut, sadly. I had a good seat, but no, I mean, look, frankly,
I saw Boris Johnson in there in Rotunda. Is he now the person who Trump speaks to more than you?
No, he's a former Prime Minister of the nation, and he's an occasional friend of Donald Trump's. He supports Donald Trump when he's going up, and he doesn't support Donald Trump when he's going down. And I've supported him consistently now for almost a decade.
Indeed, even when he was lying about the election results, and presumably even now that he's pardoning and releasing violent criminals. He's never met a billionaire he doesn't like. Do we know why Nigel Farage was photographed with Conor McGregor while he was in Washington, D.C.?
No, we don't know. I've tried to get to the bottom of this, but have not found any answers for you on this one. But not a good look, is it?
If you're not familiar with Conor McGregor's recent activities, you would have to... probably look it up to establish precisely why he probably shouldn't have found himself being photographed with the former MMA fighter who lost a civil case recently, a civil rape case in Ireland last year.
Assault. Yeah.
So we've got Andrew Tate, Farage saying they've got a lot in common and they appeal to the same sort of people. Now he's being photographed with this character.
With friends like those.
Conor McGregor. I don't know. 12:30 is the time. Thank you, Natasha. Clark. Tim Humphrey is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 is the time. If I had invited a guest into the studio 15 years ago and they had predicted the meteoric rise of the far right across the West, I think I would have looked at them askance. I would have pointed out the things I used to point out 15 years ago when I took calls from weirdos banging on about the indigenous tribes of Northern Europe or claiming that you couldn't talk about immigration without being called a racist, at which point, of course, I would invite them to talk about immigration. And they would usually fail not to be racist. But I didn't think it was. Hand on heart, I didn't think it was. I've said to you a few times that I look at the events of 1930s Germany and other obvious examples of far-right successes and somehow naively felt that we were made of different stuff, either generationally or geographically, that it couldn't, in the words of that famous book, it couldn't happen here. Dr. Nafeez Ahmed could have been that guest because you predicted 15 years ago the meteoric rise of the far right across the West. And before we turn attention to your new book, Alt Reich, looking in many ways at the culmination of that process or the current culmination of that process, let's go back in time first and ask how you got that so right.
Well, it's a good question. I don't know exactly. All I know is that at the time I was tracking a lot of these groups and I was concerned by what I thought were underlying massive system crises that are now kind of just taking off and that aren't resolved. So obviously we had the 2008 crash. And I was strongly of the belief that that was intertwined with a lot of complex issues around the way capitalism works, the way our economy is so dependent on fossil fuels, the fact that fossil fuels are going through actually an economic depletion that many people don't understand, and that's driving inflation. So I was looking at this stuff and I was thinking, if we don't do something about these underlying issues and really change the way the system works, that's going to mean that there's this underlying body of resentment that we're seeing seeds of is going to get worse, and people are going to start looking for answers outside of the norm when they see that the liberal paradigm hasn't worked. And so I was of the view that without a major systemic transformation, I can see over 15 years this is what would happen. And the thing is, when I wrote that, I didn't actually think that scenario would then happen. I was hoping that by putting forward a forecast like that we would have a little bit more sense. We would have people looking at what was going on. We would people, looking at the way the far right is working, saying, actually, we're going to do stuff, we're going to change stuff, and that won't happen. That worst case scenario wouldn't happen.
So to tie it in with my introduction, it was the fact that the planets were aligning in a new and unprecedented way that gives a new impetus to the ancient and well-trodden hatreds that inform much far-right rhetoric. So it was almost creating an opportunity. Circumstances, whether economic or social, were creating opportunities.
That's right.
For the far right. And historically, that's always been the case, whether it's, recessions and refugee crises or whatever it is but this is bigger than that and more far-reaching. So we fast forward 15 years to the new book, Alt Reich, which it then looks back over 100 years and you're identifying essentially a loose collaboration between American, British and European extremists inspired by Nazi eugenics. What else do they have in common?
So this is what I found really extraordinary. Even when I've been tracking these groups for the last 15 years. And even as someone looking at them, it's often difficult to see how they piece together. But when I wrote the book, it became really clear. And I don't want to say that this is a homogeneous network. Of course it's not. Not everyone who is right-wing or even far-right is necessarily a Nazi or pro-Nazi or whatever. But
those salutes are a bit of a clue.
Well, I think that's the thing. I don't think it's an accident that we saw that.
No.
I actually think this is the result of a very alarming trend. And there has been a deliberate strategy by people who are Nazi sympathizers to attempt to normalize and sanitize Nazi ideology within the bowels of the centre-right. And they have deliberately tried to do that. And I think the book kind of traces that process over the last 100 years. And some of the actors are very much the same.
From history to the current time, to the present day.
To the present, yeah.
So you break it down into a number of areas. And given that you delivered the manuscript in November, it is extraordinary that current events fit so neatly into your narrative, isn't it? I mean,
it really is.
And obviously you'd rather it wasn't happening,
yeah.
But it's, good for business.
I was hoping Trump would not get elected.
Sure, and yet here he is. And if we look at three things, Elon Musk crucial to all of them perhaps, amplification of far-right narratives.
That's right. So I think this is the thing with people are, for instance, agonizing over the meaning of Elon Musk's Nazi salute. And I think it's actually quite simple when you look at what Elon Musk is actually doing. If you just look at what he's done on X, you would be forgiven for suspecting that he is a Nazi sympathizer because he has amplified and boosted directly, not just indirectly. He's directly signal boosted Nazi accounts. During the riots, he was boosting people like Paul Golding, former BNP, which is a neo-Nazi party. He's actually promoted comments by people talking about Jews and how there's a Jewish conspiracy to bring immigrants over, and that's endangering the white race. And he's signal boosted these things. He's retweeted them. He's actually commented on them. He subscribes to a pro-apartheid account. He says that he's anti-apartheid, but he actually pays an actual account which is pro-apartheid and promotes all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories about blacks and minorities and so on and so forth and the extinction of the white race. And the reason I think this has happened as the result of many of these ideologies there's a concerted effort to make these ideologies mainstream. And I think this happened shortly after the end of the Second World War. A lot of these people in the West who were sympathizing with the Nazis realized that, wow, it's a different world now. People are anti-Nazi. The Nazis have just been defeated. You can't go around saying, hey, I'm a Nazi and everyone will love it. You have to change your entire approach. And one of these groups was called the Pioneer Fund. They were a Nazi foundation in New York, American-run, American-led, but they were very sympathetic with the Nazis and actually had direct contact with many Nazi eugenicists and so on and so forth. Those guys are still around, and I traced their influence on centre-right organisations in the US and the UK, which I found completely flabbergasting. But they had ties to the Heritage Foundation, massive conservative group in Washington. They have ties to the Institute for Economic Affairs, one of the major hard Brexit, Tufton Street groups, and many of those.
We're familiar with them.
Yes. So isn't it extraordinary that there was this strange marriage between this kind of hardcore eugenicism, this sympathy for eugenicism? And again, that's not to say that everyone in those organizations, even the leaders of those organizations, actually understood this process of transmission.
Of course.
But you had people in the Pioneer Fund recruited into these organizations and pushing forward their ideas.
And constantly looking for airwaves and attention and sanitization almost, or trying to smuggle in some of their ideas under the cloak of other things. So, I mean, what's mad about this book is as I've alluded to, the timeliness of it, because your talk of networked insurgencies designed to subvert and destabilise governments is literally what Elon Musk is trying to do with the UK government at the current time. And crypto is a huge part of it as well. Is a cryptocurrency, which wasn't around 100 years ago, but the desire, the ambition to dismantle the liberal administrative state was. Crypto offers an opportunity in their eyes to do that.
That's right. I think what's happening here, and as you look at the statements that have been made almost in the open, I mean, these guys are not even hiding, things that Peter Thiel has said. Democracy is exhausted, liberalism exhausted. I mean, this was a couple of months ago. He talked about the Weimar Republic being at that point where we needed a massive shift, making these kind of allusions to the Nazi things. Various ideologues in this movement, people like Curtis Yarvin, a tech bro, funded by Peter Thiel, talked about the need to smash democracies. Cryptocurrencies are consistently seen as a tool to do this because it means that you can shift the focus on national currency into these alternative currencies which are completely deregulated, uncontrolled, and dominated by these tech platforms and tech investors.
It's a proper assault on sovereignty from the point of view of a nation state, but the people who've been bleating about sovereignty for the last 8 years are either silent on this or in lockstep with precisely the kind of people that are keen to robbers of sovereignty. What do they have in common? What's the end goal? So you've mentioned lots of names. Some of them would be familiar to my listeners, some of them less so. But we know who the tech bros are. We know Thiel probably a little bit lesser known than, for example, Musk or Zuckerberg. But what's in it for them? I mean, this phrase techno-utopian fascism is beautiful. That was the name of my first band. But the common goal is what?
I think that these guys have different goals. They have different ideas for sure, and that's where there's a kind of shared ideology that's emerging. But the common goal really it centers on this idea that democracy, as it stands, liberal democracy, is dead and has to be destroyed and dismantled one way or another. And they come at this from different angles. Either they'll say there's too much wokerism, there's too much multi-ethnicity or multiculturalism, there's too much this, there's too much that. But the end goal, the solution is always the same thing, that they want to create these authoritarian political structures. And ironically, those authoritarian structures don't create real freedom for people. They consistently talk about freedom essentially for capital. So for big billionaires, so deregulate
this is
the money.
Mussolini's corporate fascism.
Absolutely.
The marriage of corporatism and fascism.
That's right.
Because one question that puzzles me, and has been puzzling me more this week than ever before, is why people who've become the richest people in the world under a system have a problem with the system under which they've become the richest people in the world. Is it simply because they think they should be even richer?
So it's interesting. There appears to be, from looking at the way these guys are thinking, they recognize that the system is in a crisis. And I think what they were very worried about over the last 15 years is that many of their colleagues in elite structures realized that we need to make concessions and the system isn't actually working as it needs to. Something does need to be done about inequality. Everyone realized that if we don't do something about it, the system is going to a crisis point. And we don't know what to do. There could be uprisings. There could be people getting really angry and upset. But they realized that you've got to do something about that. And that was where there was this kind of weird schism where you had, for instance, imagine people like Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates is more of the kind of liberal flank of that elite who was like, actually, maybe we should invest a bit more in infrastructure and we should give a bit more back to people and that's going to help. And I think he genuinely believes in some of the things he said about philanthropy, although some might say maybe he's doing it in the wrong way or blah, blah, blah. But there was definitely a real disagreement there. People like Soros, for instance, who obviously with his Open Society network has been trying to say we need to have more vibrant democracies and we need to have more dialogue and wanting to recognizing that something needs to be done. Totally different when you look at the Musk and the Thiels of the world, who having appeared to be buying into this eugenicist type of way of thinking where it's like, well, actually, what is the problem? They think the problem is not systemic. They think the problem is groups of inferior people. So there's too many black people, there's too many Muslims, too many of these other types of people who are genetically inferior. They have low IQ, they're coming into our countries and they're ruining everything. So that's a very, very different approach. And that's where you had this kind of weird marriage between some of the traditional conservative skepticism of welfare state, that you shouldn't have welfare, and this eugenicist idea, which is that basically don't throw money at these unproductive, poor, black, criminal Muslim gangs who are destroying everything. That's just that's never going to work. What we need to do is either wall them off, keep them out or contain them or depopulate them. Meanwhile, we have to focus on creating that structure that protects what we have.
I don't know whether to be encouraged or dismayed by the fact that you make this a story that has unfolded over decades. Because the idea that it's a recent emergence is comforting in the sense that it might go away as quickly as it arrived. But the notion that it's the consequence or the current culmination of decades of planning, born of the knowledge that you can no longer march around boasting about being a Nazi, or you couldn't until yesterday. It's more chilling, right? When you provide this century-long context, almost a century of context.
It is definitely. It's quite alarming to know that this is something that has been developing.
And you join the dots. We need to sell some books now. So this is mapping out how the network weaponizes all of the things we talk about on this program: the anti-black sentiment, anti-Jewish sentiment, anti-migrant, anti-Muslim hatred. Right across the world. The role of Vladimir Putin cannot be underestimated and is not underestimated by you. But your ultimate goal is to give us the tools we need to disrupt the march of the Alt Reich.
That's right. I think by understanding what has been happening, by throwing a light on the reality of who these people are, how they operate, what they really think, how they've been working together, which hasn't really been done before, I think that will allow us to make much better decisions. Because let's face it, for instance, when we don't see much of the traditional press talking about the fact that Nigel Farage has this long history of cavorting with actual Nazis, all the way back to 1997, when they actually found that there were BNP members that were joining the party and weren't supposed to, and then they were expelled. Later that year, I remember that Nigel Farage, that was when he'd just taken over the party, and it was Alan Sked, who was his co-founder, said that the party's just become, UKIP's just become a far-right radicalised party. Nigel Farage then goes and has a meeting with one of these guys, I think it was Martin Devin, his name was, who was renowned as an anti-Semite. He'd written a couple of screeds about very Protocols of Elders of Zion type stuff. And he goes and meets him for lunch. And he also at the meeting was a guy called Tony Lecomber, who was convicted of assaulting a teacher and having explosives, another neo-Nazi. So clearly kind of a pro-terrorist type guy. He meets both of these guys. And then when this came to light and he was asked about it, he was like, well, one of them just asked me for lunch.
It was me that asked him. You can find that tape on YouTube, I think. You can find the footage of that interview. There you go. Reasons to read it. Alt Reich by Nafeez Ahmed. The Network War to Destroy the West from Within is out now. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
It's 10-1.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:53 is the time. I mentioned earlier with Natasha that Davey really only needs to play two tunes in the run-up to the next election. One of them is social care and the other one is Brexit. David Gork, who of course has been on the programme this week, has written a splendid article about the tide beginning to turn against Brexit. Kemi Badenoch, extraordinary admission that they all voted for it without having any plan whatsoever to deliver it. And then, of course, the rather sad subtext, no, there is a brilliant Brexit, it just goes to a different school and we can't describe it to you yet. But Ed Davey calling for us to join the customs union or to create a customs union with the EU, which isn't quite the same thing, as soon as possible, and claiming on one radio station this morning that it would be... I meant Dominic Grieve. I meant David Gork. This is by David Gork. We had Dominic Grieve. They're the two I get mixed up all the time. Dominic Grieve and David Gork. It's like Amber Rudd and Amber Heard, although arguably an easier mistake to make in the case of two former senior Tory politicians. I digress, because Ed Davey said we could join the customs union for nothing. And I thought, could we really? Give or take, I paraphrase slightly. I don't think there will be a cost to us, to be honest, he said earlier today. And I do what I often do on matters of trade. I turn to the author of Why Politicians Lie About Trade. I don't think that Ed Davey was lying, but I think he might have been wrong. Dmitry Grozoubinski, trade expert and author of Why Politicians Lie About Trade. Before you tell us whether or not there would be a cost to us, can you just remind us what the, or indeed a, customs union is?
Yeah, absolutely, James, and it's good to be back with you.
Always a pleasure.
I think 5 years ago we were on air talking about a politician making a wildly oversimplified claim about Brexit, and now we're back here again.
Plus,
this might be our own personal loss, James. We're doomed to do this for the rest of our lives. So, a customs union is a way of structuring trade relations, where you basically say that what we are going to do is we are going to draw our customs goods border, so where tariffs are paid, around the outside of both of our countries. So that way we're going to have the same tariffs facing outward towards everybody. And that way, once a good enters any of our territories, whether it would be the UK or the European Union, after that, it can move around freely inside them, without having to go through that procedure again, because we know it either came from inside the customs union, so it doesn't need to pay tariffs, or it would have paid the right tariff coming in, regardless of where it entered.
Who is in the customs union of the European Union, but not in the European Union?
So the biggest example is Turkey. Turkey has a weird kind of customs union with the EU that includes everything except agriculture, which is quite a sort of strange arrangement in the sense that, you know, goods can enter the EU from Turkey unless they're agricultural, and so you have to kind of stop and check if they're agricultural. It's a unique arrangement they have with Turkey.
So what might be available to us? And would it be cost-free, as Ed Davey seems to believe?
Nothing in this world is cost-free.
The best things in life are free, Dmitry, I think you'll find.
Well, I mean, okay, the smile of a newborn infant, sure. Complicated trade arrangements.
We haven't got time. I'll stop messing around.
So.
Sorry, get back to your expertise.
This would definitely be the UK asking the EU to give them something. The EU needs this a lot less than the UK does. From the UK's perspective, the first cost is that the UK would have to tear up its existing free trade agreements that it's negotiated or renegotiated since Brexit, because all of those rely on the UK and those countries having different tariffs to the ones that the EU has with them.
It wouldn't be a massive loss in terms of what might be gained, but it would be embarrassing and inconvenient.
Absolutely. Look, it is a price. It is, you know, if I had to choose and I was a UK trade policymaker and those were the two options, I'd probably pick the customs union. But that it is a price to pay. And then secondly, it would be, what does the EU ask for in order to even begin this conversation? Because from the EU's perspective, firstly, this is not something they badly need. And secondly, for them, you know, this is not a checkbox exercise. This is a complicated process. And so they would have to devote a lot of headspace to negotiating this and to thinking through and to doing the internal work. And from their perspective, I think they're looking at it saying, well, hold on. Are we going to do this, spend 2 years negotiating this, have business make all of the internal arrangements to get ready for it, as they've just spent years getting ready for their not being a customs union, only to then have and I'm not wishing this upon anyone, Prime Minister Farage pull us straight back out in the name of sovereignty again. So it's a big ask.
Yeah.
And they can charge for it.
And yet, is it, I don't know, what's the difference between feasible and plausible? Feasible. Is it feasible?
I think there are two different conversations here. I think the first one is if the UK ever wants to get back into the European Union or into closer trading relations with the European Union, then it needs to have parties, even if they are in minor parties, proposing this and saying this should be the policy.
Yeah.
So I think that is important. It is certainly feasible at some point.
Right.
The question we don't have, the answers we don't have is, firstly, how much appetite does the European Union have to even have this conversation
and
yet?
That instability.
And secondly, how much appetite does the UK have for the price?
Right. Dmitry, you're a genius. Thank you. Let me why politicians lie about trade plug once again. It's always a pleasure. And I've got a feeling we're going to be talking more moving forward than we have perhaps in the last couple of years because of some of the issues that you have just raised. And Jamie joins me by saying, always a pleasure to hear from Dmitry Grozoubinski. Top man, I agree. Lots of you as well asking for the name of that book, which is reasonable, actually, because the way I said it wouldn't necessarily make it easy to know how it was spelt. So it's called Alt Reich, First word alt, A-L-T, as in alt right. Second word Reich, R-E-I-C-H, as in Third Reich, or indeed Fourth Reich. And it's by Nafeez, N-A-F-E-E-Z, Ahmed, A-H-M-E-D. And it comes with a ringing recommendation from me. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen. Oh, hang on, Chris has been in touch. Say 10 out of 10 for today's show, James. More of the same tomorrow, please. Chris, I'll do my best. You can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including the brand new James O'Brien Not Quite Bite-Sized Daily. The best bits of my show in just 60 minutes every single day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now standing in once again for Sheila Fogarty, it's Vanessa Feltz.
James O'Brien on LBC.